Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus, the giving tree of extreme metal podcasts. I am the death metal guy, aka Ronnie James Dio-centered sexual fantasy.
And I am the black metal guy, aka Ronnie James Dio-centered sexual fantasy.
you're just taking that.
I mean, I can't disagree.
That's fair. Although I was more a Dio with rainbow guy, more than anything.
I feel like in the fantasy I want to identify as Ronnie James Dio.
You want to be Dio having sex with someone else rather than Dio having sex with you.
Yeah, you're Dio and you've just sort of saved the Elf Queen or something, right?
Mine's like completely removed. I'm just imagining Dio having sex with someone I get to watch. I
guess Dio having sex with a dragon would be pretty cool.
I'm basically like, but the dragon's my wife, so I'm getting cucked by Dio. So, I don't know. It's a whole thing, and we don't need to worry about that. Anyway, 14th episode.
Dude, that's a good brutal death metal song. Brutal death metal song with a guitar solo. Mercilessly cucked by Ronnie James Dio.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah. All right.
So, episode 14. Let's start from the top with our housekeeping. What have we got today?
All right. So, first off, we've had some pretty good fan engagement, as they call it, over the last week or two. First off, I forgot to do it last week. I want to do a thank you to Psych Wizard, who left us our second Apple Play or iPod or podcast
whatever the
review,
fuck.
whatever they're calling it now. Our second Apple Podcast review. And what's interesting is that he left the review at first a few weeks back, and it was a 4-star review with a lot of really really encouraging stuff, and also some rather blunt constructive criticism, which is completely in the spirit of the show.
I think it was that we were generally pretentious, which, oh yes, of course. I mean, we're doing a metal podcast.
open to that accusation. We try, we try not to be. We try not to be too ridiculous, but yeah, it comes with the territory. Also, we both like music that involves guys wearing capes and playing keyboards. So,
yeah, that's true.
But get it. But a cool thing about this guy is that I assume it's a guy. I mean, who knows? Wizard.
It is.
I'm not psych. I know. I know. I'm running the joke. It's he could be psych sorceress, right? That'd be a different name. A cool thing about him is that he went and listened to all the episodes, and he came back and he changed his review to 5 stars, and he left a comment again, which is like, I listened to it more, and now I think I see where they're coming from. And so that's very thoughtful.
Yeah, that's much nicer than almost anyone on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, that's as they call it, intellectual integrity or whatever.
Actually,
fair-mindedness,
reevaluating your criticisms and changing your mind based off new understanding. Wow, I mean that's a vanishingly rare thing to see these days.
Yeah, and So we appreciate every dimension of that.
I just appreciate
the constructive criticism is helpful and good to know, and it's good that you feel free to do that shit. We don't want people to be, you can tell an inauthentic review, right?
And I just appreciate that he decided to foment that conclusion after listening to another 30 hours of us talking about metal. So
yeah.
Thanks for the listening time, dude.
Yeah,
I really appreciate
commitment,
it.
man.
Yeah.
And, if you want to get in touch, please leave comments on the YouTube. That's the best way to meet us. That's another.
Definitely.
Second, shout out to Maelstrom, who left us some cool comments on episode 13. We've had a good conversation about where death metal should go towards mecha death, and on the other hand, maybe towards sort of integrating some of that melodic black metal, some of the Swedish Black Death, melodic black metal influence that bands like At the Gates were getting into at the beginning, right? He talked about that, could death metal get more really early At the Gates, right? And I was like, good idea, right? So, this kind of relates to the things we were talking about with Sepulchral Curse and Drag Car. Mm-hmm. So, cool conversation with him. And again, if you want to have conversations with us, please just engage on YouTube or whatever. That's the best way. Other thing, we've got we've been working pretty hard on this show. I think we've demonstrated an ability to put out a absurd amount of content pretty regularly.
And now it's going to get even more absurd.
It's about to, we're about to double or sort of 150% that. We are today going to record our first episode of paywall content, and we'll be coming at you with some patronage systems next week. I won't shill too much for that, right? Because we'll talk about it next week. About social media, again, it seems silly, but, I'm sure there's a time when somebody has told you to like or subscribe to their thing, and you've thought, hey, maybe I should do that. So that's why we're telling you. Please like and subscribe. If you're listening on YouTube, and if you're listening on one of your podcast distributors, see if you can drop us a review. And if you want to drop us a thoughtful but critical 4-star review or 3-star review, go right ahead.
Go for 1 star as long as you listen to it. I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think we're both the kind of people who would get a huge kick out of certain 1-star reviews, right? So,
and additionally, social media. People have been asking us for it. People have been asking us for the connection to it, and we have finally decided to descend back into the morass of popular social media, much to our chagrin.
We both saved ourselves, but now we're going to do it for Terminus.
Exactly. So, over the course of this next week, we're going to be setting up pages on Facebook and Instagram. They're probably going to be kind of different feelings, so if you happen to use both of those platforms, I'd recommend subscribing to both, because me, the death metal guy, I'll be handling the Facebook, and the black metal guy will be handling the IG. So, from the black metal guy, you can probably get lots of sunset pictures of the forest and thoughtfully constructed playlists, and from me, you can probably get reposts from Slam Worldwide and shit posting about how Entombed is death metal for people who move their lips when they read and shit. So
it's although I think you've agreed to let me do some guest posts on that one.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, we got
lots of shit posting, definitely.
Yeah, it's so that there'll be a shit post Facebook and a Instagram. And I think between those two, we'll cover it seems like the black metal people gravitate more towards Instagram, and the sort of slammy, death metal-y people more on Facebook, right?
Yeah.
So anyway.
So, we've got
it, right?
Yeah, that should be it. So, we've got a big block of records today. We kind of added one at the last minute because we actually got our first submission directly to the podcast, and just for the sake of it, I guess we've never said it out loud, but if you would like to submit a demo or an album for us to consider putting on the show, feel free. A lot of the time it will probably not end up like as hugely in-depth as some of the other stuff, because we do have our own schedule to keep, but we will try to work it in whenever possible if we think it's something worth talking about, so feel free.
And we're still working on format, so I think our default format we know is just sort of 4 massive fucking album reviews a day, right? But and some shows will have that, but some shows will try to change it up more and maybe give you some more rapid fire stuff. So you can think of today as a variation on that. I think today I think generally there are always 2 albums we really want to focus on. So today we're gonna why don't we get it into the roundup, and then we'll get back to the fan submission.
Yeah, we'll do that. So you're up first today.
Oh yeah. Oh god, I am. All right. So I'm up first with the new Moulderyawn.
Great sign.
Yeah. Oh, I wasn't looking at the right part of the notes. Here we go. Moulderyawn. No, Moulderyawn and what lie neath its shade. Parentheses 4. This is an independent release, but how I know this band and how this next release was brought to my attention was by the guy from Old Mill Productions, which is this label in Canada that we've covered. We've covered their Holoruna before, their Holoruna release a few weeks ago. It's this new Canadian label that specializes in what the label owner calls folk metal, which is really different from Fintroll. So kind of experimental attempts to experimentally take ideas and sort of themes and riffing techniques and stuff from black metal, but install it in this context that comes more from either folk or dungeon synth or both, right? And so it's kind of in that tradition, it's sort of intensely atmospheric, but also strangely violent black metal about trees.
Always good.
Yes.
We've done plenty of black metal albums about the forest. It's time that the forest fight back.
Yeah, no, this is a black metal album from the perspective of the forest, which is pretty cool.
Always good.
All
right,
yeah.
So I've got second one, and I've got a one-man project from Arizona called Crushing the Scepter. Great Gorgoroth reference right there. That's what attracted me. With his, I believe, second full-length called Echoing Screams of Madness and Delusion, which is independently released digitally, but we have a cassette either coming out or is already out on Transylvanian Tapes, who I think are a label you know a little bit more about me. It's mostly black metal and kind of punk-adjacent stuff, right?
Yeah, I've been doing, I have a band, that's another sort of plug I should do. I have a Bandcamp. You can follow me there on Hellhammer666 at Bandcamp. And it's, so I see a lot of stuff on Bandcamp, and this Transylvanian Tapes is a big Bandcamp presence. Obviously that allows you to do things like get the digital instantly and order your hard copy. Nice tape editions, and it seems to be doing a big business. Yeah, black metal, a lot of doomy stuff. I think it's kind of wide-ranging. Yeah. I think it's all a little bit either punky or arty or unique in some way, going for sort of eccentric. You could probably see, I don't think it's this guy, but you could almost imagine Aesop from Cosmic Curse running it. It's got the same, it's Bay Area, and it's got the same kind of Bay Area weirdo aesthetic. Yeah, it's got that kind of eclectic, label owner as auteur thing. So. Yeah, so I think I think they've been doing a lot, and you'll probably hear more from them again on this show, would be my guess. Yeah. Yep. And so after that, my second pick. Kind of a weird one coming from me. This is actually going to be the new record from Terminal Nation called Holocene Extinction. This is going to be out on $20 Spin. I think this just got released officially a couple days ago. $20 Spin, a label that we've been familiar with for a long time. I remember buying a lot in their early days when they were kind of growing, but now I would say they've become kind of like second-tier metal label if we're talking about like... No, not in a bad. In terms of size, second rank. Yeah, they're sort of quote on like what you call them, sort of like underground mainstream. Yeah, they'd be alongside something like Willowtip, but not at the side. So $20 Spin originally, kind of an eclectic label. Alongside Profound Lore is what you'd always name alongside it. Yeah, Profound Lore. That would be a good comparison. And I think both of these labels sort of had a moment when we were coming up where they both went fairly, I know nobody likes this word anymore, but at the time it was accurate. They both went fairly hipster, and I think they both recovered from that in interesting ways. I actually always think that, for the most part, I've liked... $20 Spin has been solider overall, right? I think $20 Spin has been more solid. I would say at this point they just release so much stuff, it doesn't have the consistency of back in the day, but I'd still say it's a good label worth supporting. And so for our last couple, we got kind of a side-by-side thing going on, because these are both demos to a degree. So. Honestly, I think we should probably just run the Terminal Nation kind of quick, too, and do them as sort of three that are kind of the same length. But okay, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. It's, we got sort of two demos, right? Or the two demos that are basically the lengths of long EPs or full... or short full lengths. Would that be accurate? Yeah. So the first one we've got is Verhängnis, the self-titled, which is officially a demo by this new sort of German death metal band, or sort of doom death, or just slow death metal, right? By independent release, but there are two. Something is punk when there are two different labels doing a tape release. Yeah. So there's one coming out on Fucking Kill Records, which is a pretty good, interesting label. And there's another one coming out on Kellerassel. So they have two German labels, as far as I can tell, doing tape distribution for them. or printing tapes for them or something, or collaborating.
Yeah, that's that feels like kind of back in the old days, you know? Just when everything was like a cooperative release.
And, or you know, back in the day, or a few weeks ago, we reviewed that Life album, right? That Japanese.
It was released on like 4 labels or some shit.
Yeah. So as you can see, it's Doom Death with a crusty thing in the background, but not at all in the way you'll expect. And we'll get into that. That'll be cool.
And then finally,
our submission.
Yeah, we've got our first submission. You know, thanks a lot to this guy for sending it in.
Right word. Submission is the right word for this band.
So this is a band, a one-man project from the UK called Oppress, with a full-length, call it a demo, call it whatever you want, called No Pity. And this is released on his own label that he just started. This is the first release, called, charmingly, K.V.N.T Kolektiv. That's
K.V.N.T with periods meticulously placed between all of them.
Yeah, very like old Analnath rock aesthetic there. Like,
that's a good point. Yeah.
So just want to reach out and say, you know, thank you to OG from Oppress, which I guess is his actual initials. I thought it was a joke at first, but very cool one-man black metal project, and he's a guy who is affiliated with a project we've reviewed on the show before, which is the black noise project Violes Parle Signes from several episodes back.
Yeah,
I think that's how he found us.
Yeah, which is great, and that seems like a really interesting. If these are all K.V.N.T Kolektiv bands, it's a really interesting scene, and we're glad you're following our stuff. This guy, I think we both found a lot to like here, but certainly we will.
It's definitely worth featuring. Things. Yeah,
certainly this guy sent a great email, which was just completely earnest, deadpan, in character. I include links and a short description for your most severe scrutiny. At the bottom,
love it.
At the bottom, awaiting your cruelest remarks. Thanks in advance. Which is just sick. That's how it should be.
That's charming, man. I really appreciate that shit.
Absolutely. And so we'll try to fit a few cruel remarks in there, but I think you'll be, I think you'll be happy with our perspective.
All right,
okay,
so
cool.
let's jump in with Moulderyawn and what lies neath its shade. I know that when we reviewed Halyaruna several weeks ago, you had mentioned Moulderyawn as being one of these old mill acts, but I don't think there's necessarily a release planned on Old Mill for this yet, or...
No, I don't. I think Old Mill often does digital releases and then staggers to tape. So my guess would be that we might see this on tape from them later in the summer, right?
Okay.
But they do a lot of things like other people. So Robes of Snow releases his own stuff online, but Old Mill puts the stuff out, right?
I gotcha.
This is so Moulderyawn is. It could be that there will be some sort of nice hard copy thing, but right now it's just independently released, and I believe digital only for now. Let me check.
Yeah, it appears to only be available digitally right now.
But I know that Old Mill did... Yeah, no, okay, I bet this is what's going to happen, because Old Mill did this really lovely packaging for the first Moulderyawn, From Whence the Woods, which I got recently, and it's... And they did that a couple of years after the first Moulderyawn had come out, I assume, because they got in touch. So I bet we're going to see a hard copy release from it. I bet it's going to be really nice. But yeah, so this is, as we said before, it's sort of in the general ballpark of foresty black metal. Why don't you give your sort of lead-in thoughts about it? What do you think about it? And then I'll do mine. Okay.
So this is an interesting record because it reminds me of certain bands from a while back, probably about 15 years ago, that were trading in something almost approximating this style. I'm not sure if Moulderyawn's necessarily listened to them or if he's kind of arriving at the same idea organically, but basically Moulderyawn plays this older style of black metal plus ambient sections, not really mixing them, having separate tracks for each, kind of in the old Burzum style. But it's modernized because rather than these things being neo-folk, they're more dungeon synth tracks, very inspired by I think, like, video game soundtracks and that sort of thing.
For sure.
So, this is, for the most part, pretty simple music. The way the black metal is developed is in this kind of progressive layering way, similar to the way that the ambient music is developed.
Structurally, the black metal is pretty like Vislas Taros, or, sort of droning upper mid-tempo, sort of chord-based black metal. Yeah.
But also willing to go faster in a lot of cases, and also not necessarily as permanently wedded to consonant kind of melodies, because a lot of the bands that imitate like Vislas Taros stuff, they do that, but they lose all the darkness and all the kind of tense moments of that music.
It's an extraordinarily tense album, right?
Yeah,
even some of that's lost on Philosophem, which, hot take, I think is overrated.
I don't think it is at all, but okay. I love Philosophem.
Or let's say, no, Jesus is Taught is fucking sick, right? That's a great song, but I think Dunkelheit's a little boring.
Oh, no way, dude. No fucking way, bro.
Well, you know what? I listened to Burza most, years ago, and I think I might have more attention span for it now, so we'll see. But,
although, all this being said, this doesn't sound like Burza. This really doesn't...
not remotely. If anything, it's structurally... It's interesting in that when we were coming up, there were a lot of bands doing that, whether they were DSBM or sort of nature-y black metal, a lot of bands doing this kind of Burzum-y stuff. This is more like that than a lot of what's coming out now, but it's really different, and I think it solves a lot of problems that music had, or aims to solve it.
It's kind of more like Burzum structurally, but less in that...
structurally.
It understands that music better, but sonically, it's very different. Yeah, so let's, can I just play, my sample first, just so we get kind of an idea of what it sounds like?
And then I'll try to give my more general take. Yeah, we've talked enough.
Okay, just so people have something to get their hooks on. So, I'll play a little bit off a track called Moulderyawn, A Spell to Entwine Life and Death, which is fucking sick, dorky black metal song title. I love that to death. And
what's dorky about that, death metal guy?
The fact that there's a semicolon in it is pretty dorky.
Oh shit, I just noticed a semicolon. Never mind. Alright, I'll let you off.
Alrighty. Hey, believe me, that's not a critique. I love that sort of just straight up go for it ridiculousness. So, and this is a kind of a novel part of it. It's going to be representative of the record, but it's also a representative of some of the ideas that I think are really fun and really cool on it. So let's give that a try real quick. So what did you think of that?
Well, the thing that stands out to me is the way that, first of all, the detail on the chord progressions. Because, as you said before, in some sense it's simple, right? Yeah. But it's a really well thought out chord movement.
It's intelligent music.
It's highly what we would call melodic, but it's sort of tense, haunting melodic. It's got a bit of that spooky quality you'd associate with early Emperor, and with just early Norse stuff in general that's sort of gone. Some of it didn't age. Some of the Emperor's spooky melodies didn't age so well, but that general idea of a certain kind of extremely chromatic tending minor key melody is good. Right, and I think is having a bit of a comeback now.
And I really enjoy the contrast between that more kind of terse Emperor melody on the guitar with that very chiming kind of music box synth patch that he's got going on, which is, and it's a very video game soundtrack kind of thing. It's still minor key, but it's very catchy.
Well, And I think, you said that there's a lot of sort of dungeon synth alongside the BM. I think that is true. I think it falls in that general vein. But one reason, back in the day, often they'd be very sort of chunked side by side in a way that's like, well, couldn't I just listen to like a black metal record or an ambient record? And I think there's a serious effort being made to integrate them here. Mm-hmm. And so there, you get these synths, and of course they're synths in black metal songs, and they're integrated with the riffing in the way that you'd get in, an Emperor song, or any number of the sort of more ripping 90s bands that used keyboards. Yeah. However, it's dungeon synth tones, right?
Yeah.
And it's got this sort of, music box, fairy-like, delicate intervals. So there's nice contrast, and even in the tonality of the things interacting with each other. And you said you wanted to say something about the lead, too, right?
Oh, yeah, no, I really enjoy the way that lead guitar fades in, providing another layer of sound. Like I was saying up front, a lot of this music even the black metal, is structured like ambient music, in a sense, where you've got elements slowly being introduced or dropped out. There's, like, slow shifting of textures, because... that passage goes on for, I think, another 45 seconds.
There's a lot of repetition, which can make it, I think, it's interesting, because this guy is intentionally using a lot of repetition. If you try to listen, and it also is, for the most part, I'll get to this more with my sample, very high energy. So if you try to listen to it like a certain kind of riff-based sort of crush, kill, destroy BM, you'll constantly be moving in that direction, but then also having to lengthen your attention span out. I think it's really made for walking in the woods.
Yeah, it's definitely not...
I have listened to the first record in that context, and it's really good.
Yeah, this is definitely not riff-based music, really. I would say.
You're hanging... The riffs are all good, though, but you're hanging out with them. And if you're listening to them in the right setting... You'll be like, oh man, I'm glad another minute of this riff. Fuck yeah!
Let's get to a sample of yours so we can kind of talk about your feelings.
Yeah, well, so to build on that idea, so I think my overall take is, I think we sort of agree on where this is coming from. What I've got in my notes is the phrase "full commitment to bizarre niche aesthetic," attempting to make a space for itself, right? So, as in, there's a head fake going on in this entire record, which is, the packaging, the song titles, it all signals this kind of, this sort of melancholy, but kind of whimsical and cute, and sort of like serene and naturey and restorative thing that's big in, like, Atmo Black, which is not a real genre.
Very green color on the Magic the Gathering wheel. It's green color on the Magic the Gathering wheel. But it's actually green-black, yes.
Well, I was going to say, melancholic, whimsical, naturey, Atmo Black, or DS mood, Dungeon Synth mood. Right? And so you see all these kind of cozy Dungeon Synth albums out now. That have this cutesy quality to them, where there's all this sort of like, oh my god, it's like a rainbow over a waterfall with a stag, and like, be-doo-doo-doo, doo-doo-doo-doo. Actually, that was a better riff than a lot of fucking that shit. So it sort of feints in that direction and then completely refuses that and says, do you want something like that that's actually black metal? Mm-hmm. And that actually has the kind of creepy and troubling and demanding quality of black metal. So, what this is doing is putting the murk in Mirkwood. And it's remembering, even without getting to green and black decks, there are tons of cards. The green stuff is, a thing that people. This is a whole other rant. But I think people, what the Tolkien movies did to us, right? They had to capture things in broad strokes, right? But they totally miss how creepy the elves are supposed to be, right? It's or the elves are, they sort of like. The elves are very black metal in the books. They're these sort of amoral aristocrats, right, who act under principles that are incomprehensible to people, to humans. Or like the trees, right? Like Tom Bombadil isn't just like, oh, happy, happy guy, right? It's once you're out of the Shire and you're in Tom Bombadil land, shit's getting weird, right? You've already, shit's getting very dark. Shit's getting strange and dark. And then when you're in the Mirkwood, right? In the movie, it's all Ents, almost entirely Ents, right? But there's a distinction between Ents and Huorns, right? And this has all these sort of creepy ancient trees, and there's death in the forest. So let's go to my sample is just, you could hear this sort of let's just go to this from Who Hath Dreamt Enchanted Dream, and you'll hear this idea played out musically.
Okay, let's try that out.
Yeah. Doctor, there's a Hate Forest riff in my Atmo Black.
Well, it's also, it was funny because I was listening to it, and that's actually one of the more actual Burzum sounding parts of the record. Especially the riff on the back half there is something I could definitely imagine off of a faster part of...
You mean the rolling kind of dissonant one?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also a Hate Forest riff.
Yeah.
And the beginning of it, right? It just... You get these... There's your head fake, right? There's these delicate, beautiful synths, but the melody's actually completely consistent with what follows it, and it just hammers in. That level of guitar playing should be more common in black metal, but it's not. That's like hardcore.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, no, it's definitely got that body behind it.
You could almost imagine him throwing his guitar around his neck in between, right? He's punching it from the elbow or the shoulder, and the vocals are just, right? Those are hateful.
Yeah, they're a lot. This whole record is an interesting study of contrast. Because,
the use of palm mutes, too. Again, black metal bands are free to do it. Some use it very effectively. But you don't have to become some chuggy Pantera band to do palm mutes. This hits the palm mutes really hard in a great way. But what were you going to say? Oh, no,
I was just going to say this whole record is kind of an interesting study of contrast, and I think that's where a lot of the interest lies for me, because I really like the contrast of these kind of light, almost like pixie-ish things in the synths and these like more kind of gnarly, slightly dissonant black metal riffs, but they kind of go together because obviously the gnarly, dissonant black metal riffs are headbangable, and the kind of pixie melodies, well, pixies weren't entirely nice in folklore. They were like stealing children and shit. So I like the idea of this sort of, multi-dimensional kind of all-around look at these sort of folk traditions and fantasy memes, so to speak, that we understand about popular culture, but kind of viewed more realistically and more holistically.
Yes, fleshed out and in context. This person has read the Silmarillion, and this person, more importantly, really understands folklore, mythology, heathenism.
Yeah.
Right? Or heathendom, or paganism, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
Although there's a crushing part later in this album where there's in the Everwood and What Lie Neath Its Shade, which I don't think were Oh, you're
I
quoting
think that's
from
my sample, actually.
That's your next sample, but earlier in it, there's just this crushing part where you get to hear a tree chanting the runes.
That
And
is
it's just
always
like-
pretty cool.
That's pretty much like the heart of the album, but I don't think we're going to sample it. So let's get to your more critical comments, and we'll talk
Yeah.
about that, and then circle around back to some of the some other nice things and some idea things.
Yeah.
In the lyrics.
So,
Okay.
real quick, it's good because we're also going to get to another palm-muted riff here. And here's where I'll get a little bit more critical. And then after that, I'll also share a sample of kind of the only band that really comes to mind that's similar to this.
I was
But
going to say, there really isn't, like, yeah, it's, in some sense we ended up talking about Burzum a lot just because there's not much that's that similar to this.
yeah, I
thing.
think I've got... I think I've tapped in. I think he listens to
think
this
you
other
get it.
band. But so let's listen to this clip off the Ever Wouldn't Lie Neath Its Shade real quick.
Oh man, that's another big climax moment on this album, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
That's
a
the closest you're going to get to a big sort of consonant release riff.
It's a sample from me, so you know it's going to be like a big climactic moment. But
yeah, that's
well, so
there's your big epic passage. But
yeah.
What
So-
holds it back for you?
Well, okay, so I love this part. I love everything that he's doing. I love the chiming synth melodies. I love the way they progress.
Yeah.
They kind of sound almost on that back end like a little bit of like anime soundtrack stuff to a degree, which is something that pops up here and there, which is cool. I mean, I'm
As
fine
it
with
should.
that.
No, we never watch anime.
I don't really watch that much, but you know, here and there.
No, I would say we probably both qualify as sort of non. We know more than the casual anime fan, but we're not weebs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but my issue with this, which is my issue with the whole record, is really the production. And this is not to say that this is necessarily a badly produced album, but I think this very kind of smothered, very digital production, especially in the guitar tone, tends to sap some of the strength away. And this comes out most obviously in
Nice
these...
tree image.
Well, this comes out most obviously in these palm-muted riffs, like this one and the one that you played, where you're losing a lot of that rhythmic attack because it's just... You don't get that physical quality to the playing with this sort of like very line-in kind of guitar tone. And I think that's an issue across the record, I think.
So I think it's good you're paying attention to this. I think for me, right, I think this is a genre difference too. I think, if anything, when I was younger, I didn't pay enough attention to tone because I was so focused on intervals and just harmonic and melodic structures and rhythms. And like, when you're listening to raw black metal, you're used to listening through production.
Yeah.
And it's almost like the production, what if it's good, is just like a bonus. Or even like vocals in black metal. Vocals are often really boring, and you're just like, okay, hey, the vocalists are good. That's a nice bonus, right?
Yeah.
But like, with death metal, guitar tone is... First of all, guitar tone is more important in black metal than I thought, because it has a lot to do with your expressive range.
Yeah,
right?
it does.
And a riff... I had to start playing more to realize how riffs sound really different with different sounds on them. And in death metal, it's just extremely important. Would you agree?
Very, very.
Because it's about you talk about the materiality and corporeality.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I will fully admit I am kind of prejudiced against sort of like line 6 type tones, these very like solid state tones, very digital. I'm a very like kind of organic analog tube guy in general. I understand that's not accessible to everyone because those are really fucking expensive amps and they're a pain in the ass and you gotta deal with them. But there's definitely times where I listen to something like this. I can assume this is probably recorded just like in his house. direct into
Sure.
his DAW software or whatever. But you also see this issue where you've got this kind of weird contrast between these hyper clean kind of ambient parts and these very kind of dirty but not in the right way black metal parts.
I think I see what you mean. On the beginning of that pass with the palm mutes, I didn't hear what you meant. But as the riff repeats, there's like a second guitar that comes in, or there are just more notes in the chords, and there you can hear some detail getting lost. And I also agree, of course. I mean, I'm always going to prefer a sort of hot, organic sound.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, I think you can hear him playing, which is awesome.
Yeah, you can.
And the fact that you can hear this guitarist playing through the digitized production is impressive, right?
Yeah, that's good.
But, like, hearing it with a more live sound would be awesome. And let me follow through with that. You had your sample you wanted to play, but I've got something else that pertains to the production, but why don't we just go to your sample first?
Yeah, sure. So this will just be real quick. This is the only band that I feel really is similar to this. Have you ever listened to Marble Bog?
No, because back in the day when I had even less attention span than I do now, I read that it was black metal plus dungeon synth, and I thought, ha, fast black metal thrash beat, go tack, 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 tack.
Well, as a little bit of background
or not
knowledge...
dungeon synth, neo-folk or something.
Yeah.
I think I might have heard little bits of it, but it sounded too side-by-side to me.
Yeah, well, for those who don't know, so Marble Bog was a band who had a brief period of kind of infatuation in the underground black metal scene. This would have been around like 2006, and then everybody stopped listening. They are still doing music to this day, but just everybody stopped giving a shit. But this is the only band that really resembles Moulderyawn to me. So let's just, this is really just for the audience. If you like Moulderyawn, you want to hear more stuff like this, check this out. Let's listen to a little bit of the first track off their Forest Heart album, probably the best known one, called I Am the Forest Heart. So obviously that's going to be a little bit more depressive and more Slavic.
Wait, no, I'm still listening to it. Listen to the second fucking riff.
Oh, yeah.
Whew. Sorry, my Slav blood was boiling.
Oh, there you go. You see, I got a band for you too now. Yeah. So obviously Marble Bog
Although they are Hungarian, so technically they'd say they're Magyar.
Yeah. So
you can hear the tyrannic drone. It's
So obviously this is more like depressive and Slavic than Moulderyawn is, but I just thought that was an interesting comparison, and throughout that record you'll get into some of the more like chiming synth stuff that Moulderyawn does, so I think that he was probably listening to these guys at one point.
It has a similar level of, it's that with the Marble Bog riff is, or riffs, because I just kept listening, are intensely noble and heroic, and at the beginning it feints towards this more conventional kind of French sort of glorious melody, and then it becomes a lot more downcast, but it's still stern on the back end of the riff, right? And then it releases into this sort of droning kind of Drudke thing. It's I think that's fucking awesome, honestly. I gotta listen to this band more.
Yeah, no, I'll say I'm not like... I think they're good. I'm not a huge fan of them, but I see this as like a parallel thing that people who are into Moulderyawn would also like.
It reminds me of the best moments on Darkestra, who are an extremely hit or miss band, and also have this kind of Turco-Slavic vibe, or sort of the Magyars would probably say we're not Turks either, right? But like sort of Euro-Central Asian.
This thing. Eurasian steppe quality.
Yes, exactly. So back to my stuff, to wrap it up. I mean, I want to do a couple things about the production, and then we'll talk real quick about lyrics. So I've already talked about the big themes.
Sure.
So this is about the production. I think the production has come a long way from Whence the Woods. And you can hear that most clearly in the synths. I think with the guitars, what's happened is that the sort of, in a way you could describe the sound as sounding kind of bit crushed, right?
Yeah.
It's very sort of cubic and granular. Maybe even intensely so. And that wasn't as obvious with the guitars on the beginning, just because the riffs were a lot more just chordy and less riffy. Right? They were sort of good, but more like DSBM or Doom riffs.
Okay.
Sort of driving DSBM at their best. This is, with the synths, I think the synths have come a long way in that respect, and how he uses the synths have changed, and the sophistication of the melodies. There were times where I think at the beginning the sheer commitment to a digital dungeon synth sound kind of undermined the sophisticated things he was attempting to do, right? So let's try this sample from the middle of An Old Woods Yawning, which is this ambient part in the middle of a bigger song from Whence the Woods. So did you hear that kind of cubey sound in the synths there?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's using different patches there, or he's just gotten better at mixing, because the stuff on this new record sounds a lot better than that.
Yeah, it's, and you can hear there's a lot of interesting ideas going in there, but the rhythms are also less fluid than what they are now. Generally, what I'd say, right, is we were talking about this while the clip played, but you connected it to this sort of old school sort of 2D RPG thing, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think honestly, I think that's where a lot of dungeon synth comes from. Is like
it is.
Music from like computer RPGs from the '90s, which is cool. Yeah, no, that's fine.
I think they basically admit that, but yeah, it's so like that's a fine idea and aesthetic and a fine thing to be inspired by, I think. But, like, here you can hear this intense commitment to that kind of vibe. And I think maybe a thing that happens with the parts of the production you don't like, say, even here, right, maybe there's a bit too much weight being hung on that kind of, you're being sort of like, what did I write? You're being sort of deliberately, It's the use of this kind of highly artificial style in this intensely sincere way. Yeah. Right? The whole point is I'm gonna be sort of very deliberate about using this sort of wonky, old school kind of robotronic sound.
It's very conscious, yeah.
Yeah, and like to an extent I get that, but what it can mean is that in passages like this, in their earlier work, a little too much weight is being hung on each of those individual tones, which in themselves aren't very good, right? Yeah. You listen to that and you're like, oh, that's a polygon. Oh, there's another polygon. Whereas, and with the guitar and this new one, it's like the synths have come a long way. In some ways, the synths are more organic than the guitar on the new one, the tone. Yeah. And it's like maybe just being so committed to this particular kind of dungeon synth vibe is holding back some of the guitar. Especially when, this band is all about life and death and organism and sort of all that. So I think we'd both love to hear I know it's hard, but we'd both love to hear some sort of move towards a more, garage and mic approach here.
I mean,
even if it's lower fi.
Honestly, I really want to hear just like a full ambient album from this guy. I would listen to. It's rare for me, but I would listen to a full dungeon synth record from this guy.
I agree. I want to hear the idea. The idea here of driving towards a complete integration of the black metal and dungeon synth that sort of isn't either of the two is good, but also the ambient parts are good enough that they can hold their own weight. So let's do an ambient part from the beginning of this, Mildewed Morn, from this new one.
Sure, let's try that. You cut that sample right before it was, right as it was getting super cool, and it started introducing some of these darker Japanese video game melodies that I'm really into.
Almost like a good version of the thing that people do horribly in fucking retro wave, synthwave shit. Which is one of the worst, most misbegotten genres in the world.
I like some of it, but
it's just because if you came from listening to a lot of goth and industrial and synth stuff, you'd be like, why does anybody need this stuff?
Okay, fair enough.
That's my. I'm sure you can find good examples. I've heard better versions of it, but anyway, point being, this guy's really good with the synths. That's a cinematic level of development. What I love about the beginning is he's still conscious of the medium, right? He still knows he's working with this deliberate artificial sound.
Yeah.
But he uses it to just rest on this droning, rich tone at the beginning, right? Dung, 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 dung. And that dung, 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 dung is at the root and the bottom of this whole record.
Yeah.
And when he drops to the palm mute, it's there too. It's like, that sense of drone and eternity and rootedness being in the drone. That's in Hate Forest too.
Rootedness.
Yes. And so, there's a lot of tree logic going through this. And it's got the the way it builds on, those are lovely melodies. So he's working in both mediums as his native language, and that's really important.
Yeah.
And you can hear how much richer the tones are and where that all builds to. You said it was building at the end. Yeah, I just didn't want to give them too much, right? Because it builds into that first bit I sampled, which is just the fucking throwdown, Ents thrashing orcs bit, right? It's So, and here's the last bit. I want to talk real quick about the lyrics, just because they're really thoughtful and good. Mm-hmm. We've already revealed how this is kind of like we've already talked about how this is kind of like, hey, let's remember, right? Forests. There's not this. What was brilliant about black metal at the beginning was it had this completely desentimentalized view of nature.
Yeah.
Right? It was this profound respect for the natural and a desire to align oneself with it, but nature was red in tooth and claw.
Yeah.
Right? And there's room for sentiment or even whimsy in that, right? Yeah. But like in this forest, right, there's tons of mildew, mold, and rot, right? Nature isn't just like quote unquote life. And the whole mystery of black metal, so-called, or one aspect of it, is that it's this sort of long view vision of life as a cyclical process, right? That involves violence and death. And this kind of adopting this tree-like. This album does a really good job of adopting this inhuman but highly organic and kind of passionate sort of vibe. And it seems to be written from the perspective of an ent that's like talking to trees and then possibly talking to the listener, trying to convince them to lie down in the forest and become a tree.
Yeah, he's got like a little story, I think, about what it's about on the Bandcamp page.
Let me read a little bit of the lyrics here.
Sure.
It's this is from, and let's see. What did I want off? Who Hath Dreamt Enchanted Dream? Yeah. So this is off the one with the heavier one I played. The whole thing reads really well out loud. Wake, 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 who hath dreamt enchanted dream. Wake, wake, wake up, enrooted friend. Wake, 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 who hath dreamt enchanted dream. Winter has come to pass again. Walk, walk, walk with shrunken legs. Another ring of wintry slumber adorns your skin. Shamble, shamble, bark and bramble. Skip, jump, kick heel with glee. Dance ye now, who hath enrooted feet. Dance now merrily, go now and shamble off, and on into a mildewed morn. Into a mildewed morn. Awaken thee, rise to thy feet, who hath dreamt my enchanted dream. Go forth and claim the earth. Swiftly, swiftly, go forth and be as leaf to a gust wind. Ghastly, ghastly, blight-adorned leaf. Root rot, canker spotted and all. Wear the cloak of the earth and rise from the dirt. Go forth and claim the earth. That's pretty close to poetry.
Oh yeah, it definitely, he's inspired by kind of British romantic stuff there, clearly.
Victorian, yeah. It could, that could stand on its own. People would say, oh, that's like, this is obsolete language or whatever, which people complained about in the early 20th century too. But like, the ye olde quality here, I think, is really pulled off by someone who has a feeling for those rhythms and for those constructions generally. And when it's a little over the top in a metal way, sure, it's metal. That's a really beautiful line. And from Spell to Entwined Life and Death, this is just one that sort of clarifies the plot. This is like one of the last couple stanzas. Upon a mildewed morn, I tend to mounds, moss-adorned, seeking who hath dreamt enchanted dream. Hear my call who rests neath the moss, wake and breathe with life again. Thither, thither, nearer, nearer, unto the embrace of life again, unadulterated being with the earth. Lay your heavy head in the dirt, let the moss blanket you. I will sing you sweetly to rest. Fall now, fall to sleep. A bellowing yawn draws up from the hollow of my trunk, mold scatters the wind again. And when I wake, this ancient spell of life and death will spill from my maw. And when I wake, my voice will wander with the wind, seeking who lie by root and soil to grant them enchanted dream. Ugh! Right? I mean, that one's a little more prosy at the beginning, but you can hear the sort of plot. He's either talking to his herds of Huorns, and or he's talking to the listener.
Yeah.
Right? He's trying to recruit you as an ent.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I mean, that'd be cool. I could be all wood and shit.
Yeah, and the lyrics are about, the guardian of the forest, watching the woods, watching over the woods and sort of glorying in, perceiving it all as one thing and glorying in its movement. So I think this is, like we said, we got some constructive criticism, but this is really cool. I fucking love this project. I loved sitting out on the porch listening to it last night. It's good for walking in the woods. Any closing thoughts?
So overall, I'm interested to see where this project goes. I definitely want to follow on the next release, because I can see a couple ways. I could see him iterating on this, and I think the next record is where it might come into full fruition. But then I also wonder, could this be a dead end at the same time? Where do you expand from here? Because this is burrowed down into such a precise niche, I'm wondering how it expands out. But either way, I'm interested to see kind of what comes forward.
Well, there's already been some expansion in terms of just making the guitars a lot riffier. But what that does is produce a new challenge, which is if the fundamental challenge of this is integrating the synths and the guitars, right?
Yeah.
How do you do that when the guitars are becoming more active? It does it in many places throughout here in the way that black metal keyboards generally does. But how can you make the blend more seamless? Maybe another solution would be to keep a lot of the riffiness while toning down some of the aggression next time to make it blend a little more.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, I really like the aggression here. I think this is...
No, I do. I think that's a good part of this music.
Exactly. So just a lot of the stuff on Old Mill, this strikes me as genuinely lowercase e experimental music.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? This guy's trying something risky, and he's trying to figure it out, and my God...
For the most part, he pulls it off, yeah.
For the most part, he pulls it off, so I'm interested to see how he deals with these compositional problems he's deliberately set himself.
Yeah. All right, so that's probably a good spot to end on. What a perfect way to end on that. It's like, I'm interested to see how he kind of experiments with these compositional problems that he set for himself. That's, ooh. Are we on NPR's Fresh Air or something? Come on, man.
We are NPR's Fresh Air, and we are coming to you from a bunker under bombed-out New Transylvania with our with our 50 cal bolters at the ready.
All right, let's take a quick break.
NPR will be broadcasting even as the sort of even as the giant vampire bats descend.
But be sure to donate for your tote bag in the meantime.
Exactly. Our totes are just large enough to carry your bolter.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we'll be back with some new music.
All right, peace. Yeah, I think we're good. We got through that. So now time for some extremely unpleasant music.
It is pretty unpleasant. This is...
Yeah, I think mixed feelings about this one. We'll see.
Well, this is Crushing the Scepter with Echoing Screams of Madness and Delusion out on Transylvanian tapes, and I actually did enjoy this one a lot. I'm kind of curious as to where your mix... Well, up front, so this is a you're
going to leave that in. I said that before I thought it was before we started, but fair enough. I do have mixed feelings.
Okay.
I think I'm overall positive, but
I'm overall positive about this one. So for those who haven't heard the project, which I assume is everyone, this is a one-man black funeral doom project from Arizona, apparently, and this was a totally random find on Metal Archives. We had to last minute replace a record for this, so I ended up going with the Terminal Nation. But I just found this one.
We're doing next week, right?
Yeah. It's a very interesting black metal record.
Wait, what?
But you skipped for a second. It's okay.
I think we had a cutout, but yeah.
Yeah. You had a cutout. It's all right.
Yeah, no, we had Old Ellen Gash for next week, but it's not out till next week.
Yep. So, we've got Crushing the Scepter.
All right. So, this is... Yeah, man, it must be cold at night in Arizona. I hear it is. Right?
This is a miserable fucking album.
This is, so we've talked on the show before, how, like, things like black metal especially, right? Or black metal related things, and doom too, has become too pleasant.
Yeah.
In many ways, melodic is good, consonant ideas can be great, epic, whatever. That's all great, but like, so often it's a little too goddamn pleasant. And we loved that Funeral Orchestra record that you brought to us a while ago now, right? Because it was so fucking unpleasant.
Unpleasant, but also. But it was also riffy. It was also memorable.
It was extremely riffy and memorable, and it actually was just a lot of the kicks you'd get in a crushing primitive black death record slowed down. And so this is different in that it's fully committed to the unpleasant thing, basically. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a good thing, productive. I think that's a productive thing to be doing in Doom. It's certainly the opposite of that cringe Bellwitch record we reviewed the other week. But it does, to me... I think for me, my main question is about just the first track. So, since I've already talked about my mixed feelings, unless you've got any lead-in stuff, why don't we just play this clip off the first track, and then we'll go from...
Yeah, we'll go from there.
Why don't we move from me complaining to the positives?
Okay, cool. So let's go with the first track, Withering Decay. Let's try that out. Well, so what is it about this this sample that grabbed you or you wanted to talk about?
Well, I guess, so to me that's nothing about that, right, is bad. And in fact, you can hear that there's a lot of compositional care that's gone into arranging the nastiest possible intervals in the least intuitive time sequencing, right?
Yeah.
In that riff, right? There's a staggered quality to it. And then the moment where the bass drum comes in, the riff slightly varies, but that's like, relative to this particular track, the bass drum entry and this riff, this is the big moment. This is the big riff on this first track. And it's just this kind of anxious tension building thing. And I think it strikes me that from your picks and my picks, before I added this, so you had your 2 and I had 1 in, neither of us had picked anything from the first track, which is 15 minutes longer than the other 2.
It's not 15 minutes longer. It's 15 minutes, which is longer than the other.
15 minutes. The other 2 are 14 minutes, but it's over a third of the record.
No, I will say, no, I agree. I think the opening track is substantially weaker than the other 2. That's something that I felt as well.
And I get that there's a pacing thing, which is that you can't do the cool things that, given the structure, this album wants to have this kind of totally indifferent seismic pacing, as you said, right? I get that you can't do the certain kinds of small, cool things that happen later on without this kind of big stretch of desolate bleakness.
Yeah.
But surely there are ways to do it in ways that have, there's being unpleasant, and then there's writing unpleasant music. And this part to me feels more, oh my god, there's a girl with a literal fucking lizard hanging out on her shoulder walking down the street.
Oh, like an iguana?
I guess. Either that or it's a really weird looking kitten. But that's pretty fucking cool. Okay. I think my cat has autism. Okay, well, so that was a golden moment. But anyway, it's very unpleasant in the way that I think something like 12-tone music is deliberately unpleasant, where it's just like, somebody took a lot of care with this, but could you take a lot of care and write something else?
So I think that this might come down to just kind of like historical understanding, because I know you've listened to a fair amount of funeral doom, but like not as much as me in general.
Sure, yeah. I mostly listen to Skepticism and Thurgathon, and then stuff that you should have made.
Yeah. So really this record reaches back to sort of a mid to late 2000 style of funeral doom, where the endurance test part of it was a substantial part of the music. And I think there's almost an argument to make that this could be seen as extremely slow black metal, in a way, more than funeral doom proper. Do you get what I'm talking about there?
But that wouldn't pass the cut as black metal riffing. It wouldn't, right?
Well, would it pass the cut, for instance, as like Xasthur riffing, though?
Maybe, but we both dislike Xasthur.
Yeah, but I like the way he does it here. So,
it's, again, I think that riff could be in a song, and it might be good in a certain context. I think that the problem I have just with this song is most of the song is ambient sound with some kind of guitar droney stuff happening, sort of little shadows of melodies, and then it swells to this at around the 9-minute mark, and that's the big moment. And I get that this track needs to be dissonant and more droney and gnarly than any of the stuff after it, which is also pretty dissonant and droney and gnarly.
Yeah.
But to me, the execute, I just didn't get anything out of this track as a whole, and I get that there's been thought put into it, but it doesn't resonate with me.
Okay, well, that's fair, and I would say that to a large part I agree with you. This is the weakest track.
I think I failed the endurance test.
Possibly.
It's just,
Let's move on to something with, like, more of a big moment to it. So let's listen to my first sample off the title track, Echoing Screams of Madness and Delusion, and I'll kind of talk a little bit more about what I think the methodology is on this record.
Mm-hmm.
That is intensely unpleasant.
Yeah.
But sort of beautiful at the same time.
Very beautiful, yeah. I mean, you get... No, yeah, that is sort of just majestic and crushingly bleak.
Yeah.
You get the... I mean, the part that I like, in terms of, like... I want to be more positive now, because I was pretty down on that first part, just for drama. But the ugly part here is awesome. Right, because it's got that first sort of falling, kind of dissonant, almost DSVM riff.
Yeah.
And then it just goes into that sort of lurch.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of just a couple chords sort of dissonant. A couple of chords that have no distinct tonal quality. They could be dissonant, they could be consonant, you don't know.
It's
until
just
the
very
next riff comes in.
Gray. There's a lot of grayness to this album.
Yeah, but that moment of just like, gung, gung, when the gung, gung comes in. I love that. I mean, that's just heavy and brutal, right?
Well, I think that what's interesting about this part is, like...
To me, that's ugly in a very musical way.
Yeah, I get you. So, the thing that grips me about this is, this expresses why Funeral Doom is actually really hard music to write. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. Because they think, oh, it's slow, it's easy to play. Yeah. No, it's not. There's a ton of nuance and understanding at a very kind of like top-down level of how to map out this music. I mean, that single channel guitar part, they sit on it for so long, but that's what gives it the power when it opens up. Kind of like what you were saying about the first track, where it's like you need this stretch of desolation to make these moments as powerful as they are, despite how simple they are technically.
This is very, I mean, maybe a thing we'll talk about more on this show is, like, event-driven music.
Yeah.
I think weirdly Terminal Nation tries for that, or accidentally ends up there. This is very event-driven music, deliberately, as in, there are these long stretches where nothing, quote-unquote, happens. You're just in a space. Yeah. And then something happens.
Well, and that's very similar to early skepticism.
Kind of like real life.
Yeah.
Kind of like history, right?
And it's like...
because there are three things happen in a row. In a relatively quick succession for this track, right?
Yeah. But then that also reflects on early skepticism, where it, like Stormcrow Fleet operates on this, like, fucking geological timetable. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Of just, like... Yeah. Just fucking, like, a minute and a half of just kind of a drum solo plus, like, little organs in the background, and that's what makes the return so powerful. But it's so stretched out, most people can't deal with it.
Organs.
Oh, yeah. In every sense of the word. So let's get to your later sample off this track.
Yeah, so, I mean, we'll just get into it, and then you'll immediately hear why I like it.
Alrighty.
And this is from later in Echoing Screams of Madness and Delusion.
Alright, let's give that a try.
So, I think I told everyone to get ready for the big moment, then I faked people out, but forgot I did. Right? Because it comes in on that kind of suspended, just downward spiraling arpeggio, and then you get the big moment, right?
Yeah.
And that big moment, I can't pinpoint what it is. I listen to more of Under the Sign of Hell. I've listened to the first couple Gorgoroth a ton also, but... Yeah. I more just listen through them all in a row when I listen to those two. What song is that off of Pentagram? Because it does a thing. There's some really powerful slow stuff off Pentagram, and it's either it could be Katarina's Bortgang. It could be like That's Ringing a Bell.
Well, the obvious like slow track off Pentagram
is it just Crushing the Scepter?
No, Ritual is really slow for a large part of it. It could be off Crushing the Scepter. It's been a while since I've listened to it.
Okay, we're gonna cut the show real quick, and the black metal guy's gonna find the part.
Okay.
Gorgoroth. It's all right. So what I think I'm thinking about is just a feeling of when Gorgoroth does a big shift, and the bass is moving slower than the guitars and stuff. And I think that they do that with blast beats sometimes. It's not a perfect comparison, but I think for simplicity's sake, and for people, if you're rusty on your early Gorgoroth, maybe you just listen to a lot of death metal. It's let's play it real quick off Ritual, which is kind of a slower track that has this big epic moment at the end. And also, I think leading up to this is one of the best uses of the phrase "die for Satan" in a bar.
I mean, is there any bad way to use that? Or?
No, Sacramentum is a great one. In the name of Satan, blood shall be spilled.
Alrighty. You got a sample for me, or?
Yeah, I got it. 234 here. I'm Discording it to you.
Okay, cool. So I get we were talking about that, this sort of like, it's like melodically resolving, but in this super like down kind of negative way.
Yeah, and there's some sort of interaction going on between a bass tier, like the lower substratum, which is keeping up this sort of booming, slower sense of time, and the spiraling kind of melodic part.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They're moving on different times.
Yeah, they're kind of, it keeps intersecting differently because they're kind of moving within different time frames of each other, so the context is constantly changing.
And you said while they were playing this sample, was this in 7/4?
Yeah, there's a big, obviously counting is kind of arbitrary. You could call it like several bars of 4/4 followed by a 3/4 bar or something, but I just counted as 7/4.
No, I think that was right. It followed the length of the phrase.
Yeah, so it's there's some other like kind of interesting time trickery on this record just to like vary it up a little bit. But let's get to my last sample real quick. This is off the final track of the 3-track album, of course. This is off Cast Through Violence, and I'll talk a little bit about what I think some of the big influences of this record are. So let's give that a try. Okay, so I figured that's a part you'd probably enjoy a lot.
Those are some very authoritative blast beats.
Yeah, like we were saying during while the clip was playing, that reminds me a lot of early Ruins of Beverest. Mm-hmm. But the biggest influence...
Oh, yeah, and I mean, the way that early Ruins of Beverest has this intentional, or all until the most recent Ruins of Beverest, has this intentional chunkiness about it, where it will be like, here's the slow part, and then, bam, blast beats.
Well, especially something like Rain Upon the Impure.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great, yes.
But then the biggest influence I detect on this record is another band that sounds kind of like Ruins of Beverest in its slowest moments, which is a black funeral doom band from Australia called Elysian Blaze, if you're familiar with them.
No, I've heard the name.
So I'm not a huge fan. It's got a similar like Zasterish like sort of wandering around a space quality to it. And I think Crushing the Scepter actually does this style better, because despite how laborious it is in a lot of parts, there's very clear arcs for how these songs progress. And I like that they don't conclude in huge revelatory melodies. They conclude with, like, a further burrowing down into this very, like, miserable, fearful quality that this music has. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't think... Yeah, whatever kind of release this album gives you is not it's not a way out.
You're not, like, exhaling. It's just kind of like... Oh, man, I get the sense that it's like...
Maybe at a certain point you just stop feeling oppressed by the suffocating power and begin identifying with it.
I think of this maybe just because it's from Arizona, like it's like being lost at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, like shrieking for someone to like notice that you're down there. You know what I mean? There's this suffocating, like claustrophobic quality, and this isn't really a style that I liked back in the day.
Maybe at the end you're just like, well, this is where I live now.
I gotta make a hut at the bottom of the Grand Canyon.
I can see a few stars up there.
I really, this is a hard record to talk about in a way because, in a big sense that a lot of it has to do with just buying into the atmosphere, really kind of like subsuming yourself into this very all-encompassing sort of misery. But that's very easy for me to do as a guy that's listened to Funeral Doom for so long.
Yeah, you have I think of anyone I know, you have the highest tolerance for music that is like, not just unpleasant, but like activates emotions that most people just try to avoid feeling.
And just like actively hostile music in a sense.
Well, I love actively hostile music.
Well, I mean, but specifically hostile to the listener. Yes.
Oh, well, a lot of music is hostile to the listener and the world at the same time. You know what I mean? Like, I get what you mean. I get what you mean for sure. Yeah, this is primarily directed at the listener.
Yeah, and I think
it's
that's
like that
something...
White House thing you like.
Oh yeah, I do love White House, and I mean that's the same with a lot of like power electronics and shit like that. I really like but I guess what I appreciate about this record, because I've heard plenty of records that basically sound like this, is the subtlety with how he kind of develops these musical ideas. These are not simple blocks that are dropped in. They have deliberate purpose, and even like that blast section we just played, which I believe is really one of the only real blast sections on the record.
It is the only one, yeah.
I think, it's the only one. Despite how fast it is, it's the fastest part of the record, it doesn't feel fast. It conveys that same timeless, like, just expanse that the rest of the record conveys.
And we've talked before about how sometimes if you play blast really fast or with a certain kind of chording, they're going to sound slow. Right?
Yeah, they become motionless, just hanging.
Interestingly, right, so that can make them kind of ethereal, which can be good. It can also make them forceless and weak, like in a lot of Atmo Black stuff.
Yeah.
Or just sort of default, back in the day we called it Norsecore, right?
Yeah.
Norsecore kind of loses its power, Dark Funeral stuff. But in this case, he's going for the atmospheric sprawl blast in the best sense, but he's also they're like, maybe not 8th note blasts, but they're slow blasts, right? 16th note blasting at this tempo, you're doing almost a Beharit blast, or a blasphemy blast. And they're not sloppy. They're really locked in, downbeat kind of feel, and they have a lot of force in them. I mean, you can headbang to that part.
That's probably because it's a drum machine.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think you can deliver a record that refuses to provide normal metal kicks, and then when it wants to, can deliver on them.
I think there's a power in that, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's a sign that the person's in control of what they're doing, right?
Yeah. I guess really to sum it up, I appreciate how this rejects so many of the norms of heavy metal as we understand it, you know?
It's totally not a heavy metal record, yeah.
Yeah, it's not riff based, it's not based off climactic moments, although they exist. It's based off this, which is why it's kind of a good rejoinder to the Moulderyawn. It's an exploration of a certain idea space. And I can really get into records that's the whole purpose of them, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly. I think I forgot to say this at the beginning, but I think a lot of what we're covering today, there's kind of these family resemblances between most of the things we're covering, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not so much the Oppress at the end, but everything else we chose, all of it's kind of slow. The Moulderyawn is very foresty. The Verhängnis is very foresty in a kind of similar way, but from Death Doom.
Yeah, and this is very kind of geological,
spacey, and Terminal Nation is kind of... The title suggests eco stuff. I don't think that's really what the album's mostly about, but also it's very slow, trudging music. Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's about it for this. So we're wrapping up on the end of our first half of the show, and we would like to remind you to, if you're listening on YouTube, to please like and or subscribe.
Smash that motherfucking like button.
Yeah, or smash that motherfucking dislike button.
Yeah, you can do that too. Engagement is engagement. So
any attention is better than no attention. And feel free to leave a comment, because we like talking with you guys about this. This is, in fact, the only thing we ever think about.
Yeah, it is.
And, if you're listening on, Apple whatever, please, feel free to leave us some stars or a review and or both, right?
Yeah. Yeah. What is up, YouTubers? It's Terminus coming back at you with another episode of our podcast.
Oh, God.
Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and you'll be entered into a raffle for a fucking Slayer record that Kerry King came on.
And now a word from our sponsors, Spongeland. In this game, in this cool game, you farm different kinds of sponges. You can pay for upgrades to your sponges. You can get the pink sponge. You can get sort of.
Jesus Christ! All right,
yeah.
We'll be back in a moment with some more music. Oh, Jesus. All right, everybody, welcome back. And let's get into probably a very weird record for me to bring to the table. The new Terminal Nation with Holocene Extinction. This is not a band that I was familiar with, but like I said, we needed a last-minute replacement, and I found this, and I ended up actually enjoying it a lot more than I expected, although I know that you're, not really in the same camp as me on that, which is kind of funny, just given our general taste.
Yeah, well, yeah, because this is more of the general wheelhouse for this record would be kind of, it's a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
But it's, generally speaking, supposed to be this kind of, power violence meets death metal meets beatdown thing.
Yeah, it's kind of it's pulling from a lot of places in modern hardcore, but there's kind of this metal, not even aesthetic, but technique applied over the top of it. And
yeah, it's of a piece with the, Xibalba weren't even necessarily the first people to do it, and I've realized that a lot of the beatdown stuff that we like, really has precedent in Europe, right? In Germany and Belgium. So there were other people doing it, but this HM2 thing where everyone starts getting really into certain kinds of entombed riffs and Swedish death metal guitar tone and shit, right?
Yeah.
Which Xibalba was kind of part of, although they're also doing a lot of other stuff. And then there are all these other bands on Close Casket. I think some of them are on Close Casket Activities. reminded of a band called like Disgrace, who I think I liked more in concept than the execution. But since then, right, it's just ballooned in all sorts of directions.
Yeah. But
and
to be fair, this is kind of reaching towards another section of the style where kind of my spicy take about this album comes in, which is that
already the spicy take.
Yeah, let's do the spicy take up front, which is
why don't we play a sample and then that will make your spicy take the spicier. Yeah.
So let's go with what's listed as my second sample. Let's go with a little bit of Death for Profit. Let's try that.
That's a classic hardcore song title.
Yeah, it is.
That's a good part.
Yeah, so I guess probably the closest structurally this music is, and we have to create a distinction between kind of structure and aesthetic on this music. Structurally, this is closest to kind of a power violence band. And power violence is a term that is very strange and kind of, I think, misused these days to just indicate... It indicates, like, heavy, old-school, hardcore influenced music, but the reality is power violence is different.
It's lost its meaning, right?
It has. Yeah, because, for instance, a band that this would be comparable to, in a sense, that a lot of people call power violence, would be Nails, but I think Terminal Nation does this style much better than Nails ever did.
Oh, but that's probably because you didn't listen to You Are Not One of Us, right?
You mean You Will Never Be One of Us?
Whatever, you know.
I heard a couple tracks off it.
Sorry, you can't sit with us.
Yeah, no, I heard a couple tracks off it. It's okay. It's not...
I thought that album... I remember we both griped about the first Nails back in the day, in part because of that shitty sort of memey kind of Hellhammer shirt thing that they started as a trend. My feeling about my spicy take on You Will Never Be One of Us is that kind of like... Well, obviously the preposterous posturing that came with that record kind of undermined it a bit. Yeah. But at the same time, and it's a weird thing to do while you're selling out.
Yeah.
Like, while you're moving to Nuclear Blast or whatever. But, it seems like... it seems like some people had bees in their bonnets about the wrong things, but it also seems like he was kind of a genuinely unpleasant dude in some ways. I don't think he was doing himself any favors, let's say.
Yeah.
And so I think that was a record that was honestly pretty damn good. It was just kind of like willfully inorganic.
Yeah.
Sort of cubed and brick-walled to all hell. Yeah. And it had really good, well-written, bouncing dynamic breakdown riffs and tight ripping D beats. It was extremely economical, and I see that as the kind of the opposite of this record.
Okay, I guess I kind of get where you're coming from. You see, I don't know, not to dwell too long on Nails, but I will fully admit that I think a lot of my distaste for it just comes from this overbearing aesthetic of toughness, but it's like not believable toughness in the way that a beatdown band is,
Sure, yeah, there's a lot of bluster, and I mean this band has that the Terminal Nation has that too, right? The big scary guy voice. But but it's sort of a genre convention with power violence. It's sort of supposed to sound preposterous.
That's true. That's a fair assessment.
I think basically I get why people are turned off by Nails. We were initially turned off by Nails. I think there's a good argument that they did not have a good influence on things.
Yeah,
right.
I think there's
neither of us likes that sort of trucker hat darkcore crap.
There's a direct line to be drawn from Nails to stuff like Full of Hell.
Oof. Yeah. But anyway, so like This is definitely something like Nails in the sense that it gets called power violence, but has a tenuous relationship to that.
Yeah.
But the part that you just sampled really uses power violence structure techniques. Maybe,
Yeah.
do you want me? Which of us is better qualified to explain what the fuck power violence is? Maybe me in the abstract, but you listen more grindcore.
I think I listen to more power violence and grindcore, but I think you've got a better understanding of the punk roots of it, so I think you probably.
It seems like, as far as I can tell, right, power violence, it's one of those words that nobody knows how to pin down exactly, but right, it's stuff like infest, right?
Yeah.
Or Siege would have been one of the first power violence things. I really like Siege. That's just blistering, destructive hardcore.
Or like Charles Bronson, who I know you're not a big fan of, but yeah.
And then who's that other band that everyone talks about that's really deliberately weird that I don't care about? Man is the Bastard. Super don't care.
Love Man is the Bastard.
Super don't care. But it's sort of like a parallel universe version of grindcore.
Yeah.
Right? And if it's influenced by grind, it's influenced more by heresy. And more by the grind that comes from the hardcore side of things, rather than, say, UK crusty grind.
Yeah.
Or crusty / death metal grind. And there's also this term that's even more confusing called fastcore that goes alongside it.
Which I think is kind of referential to, like, kind of the Japanese, like, fuck on the beach style of power violence.
Maybe let's just say power violence with a little bit less body in it.
Yeah.
Because I think the classic power violence thing is extremely fast, maybe a little bit more disciplined blasting than some kind of really sloppy grind stuff, but extremely fast, and then just these very steep decelerations.
Yeah, these super heavy kind of like sludge breakdowns.
Yeah, there's a Hellhammer thing at the base of it, for sure. And like this kind of like punks carrying certain kind of grindcore, this is noise not music things to like one of their craziest possible conclusions, right?
Yeah, I
enjoyed it a lot. That everyone loved back in the day, Weekend Nachos.
Yeah, I never
really listened to them, but I liked a band. That band, there was a band related to them called Like Rats that I thought was really good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So basically, we've talked a little bit.
Power violence techniques in the sample you just played. How would you run that down real quick?
Well, obviously they're like power violence bands. So Critical Nation is really into using blast beats as these like very blurry tension builders.
Not Critical Nation.
I don't know why I always say Critical Nation. Terminal Nation.
I get
Thank
confused too. I always get sort of I keep confusing it with what is it? Something of a Sadist Nation, the fucking Darkest Hour record. I listened to that song today. And I was like, this is great.
So anyway, like a power violence band, Terminal Nation, they use blast beats as these kind of like blurry tension builders in a sense. They're kind of static, you know, in that grindcore riffing technique, but they use them before these huge stompy releases. And I think this is where I should kind of get into my spicy take, which is that
I think the two-step, real quick, you can hear how the blast there, the riff was pretty good when you heard it without the beats. When the beats come in, it blurs to all hell.
Yeah.
And then you get a two-step, and the best parts on this record, I really liked, we're going to cut this sample just for time's sake, but there's the beginning of this track, Revenge, where they're firing on all cylinders like this, and maybe I like it even better. There's a great riff, kind of like well-structured blast riff with some internal shape to it, like a Marduk thing or whatever, and then it fires off into this two-step, big two-step, same as here, and I like those on this record, and I wish there were more of them. And then they work back into this more trudgy rhythm, which is like core to the formula here, I think.
Yeah, there's a lot of this record is surprisingly slow.
Yes, which has always been a part of power violence.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess to get to my spicy take that I talked about up front, I think this is my favorite thrash metal record of the year. Because we talked, which I know is going to get attention right there. So,
see, we made you guys wait, and it was good. All right.
So we sort of like talked about on a previous episode the idea of maybe thrash is more of a technique or a mood than a genre, which, you know, we're not big thrash fans, but we understand, okay, so there's a thrash idea going on.
We like the technique.
We like the technique, but how do you make modern thrash metal?
Oh, just to make that clear for people, as far as the technique, right, it's like, what we mean is, say, thrashing is a thing that was done one way or another by Motorhead and Discharge, before thrash metal, arguably by Venom kind of before thrash metal, by Hellhammer at the same time, harder. And sort of Metallica helps develop this technology, which is, you can't discount Kill 'Em All or Ride the Lightning for that. They developed this thrashing technology based on palm mutes more than those other bands. And then it gets but they make the mistake of thinking it's this thing for writing heavy metal songs. And while everyone else is inventing extreme metal, the Big Four and all the thrash bands influenced by them are writing these kinds of lame kind of heavy metal songs that have palm mutes in them.
Except for Slayer.
I was going to say, no, Slayer does... Yeah, sorry. Yeah, when I say Big Four, I almost just don't even count Slayer, right? Because Slayer is making extreme music, and then Creator and Dark Angel and all these other bands, they get some of that potential. But so we tend to like the more death thrashy bands, Demolition Hammer, and not so much thrash metal. But this has something in common to me with thrash metal, right?
Yeah, well, that kind of goes to what I was saying. It was like, so if the original idea of thrash metal, the building blocks are heavy metal and hardcore punk, how do you make a modern version of that? Well, you do it with something like what is extreme metal nowadays, which is something that hovers around death metal, I would say. That's kind of like, if you were to just like average everything out, it's kind of around death metal. And then you add...
Yeah, black metal's had this huge influence on everything, but if you wanted to say the generic idea of extreme metal, it'd probably be something like chunky, hardcore-ish, kind of black metal-y death metal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you combine that with kind of these noisier edges of the beatdown style of hardcore, and then you've basically got the modern equivalent of those original building blocks. And that's kind of what I see here, is it's a reinterpretation... in a very broad sense of kind of these 80s thrash ideas, along with like the stridently political style and just kind of the imagery they use. They're trying to reflect that era, but I think they're doing it in a pretty cool way.
Yeah, I think this is sort of a formally interesting idea because or album. I can start complaining about it in a minute. But let me just say, this is like, it works, it fills the niche of thrash metal, and it does it in this bizarre way, parallel universe way, where it's really kind of slow, like super lower mid-tempo, or upper slow. And it, like thrash metal, the emphasis is not on riffing, or even on heaviness, but on vocal hooks and big, memorable kind of musical events. This album, by hardcore standards or beatdown standards, never really does anything. It does some things in a few little moments. That moment you just played had some heaviness to it, but if you've been following the last 10 years of heavy hardcore, heard a lot of heavier stuff. There are really good big moments on it. The guitarist could play in a death metal band if he wanted to, and some of the soloing is actually not wank. It's kind of cool. The vocalist writes these kinds of big kind of propaganda lyrics that, that have these kinds of big, deliberately dumb hooks built into them and are very audible. And it gives it a kind of thrash metal memorability at these moments. So let's play a song. They've got almost a whole song, Master Plan, works like this, and I think is a good example of this formula kind of undeniably working. It's like, well, I remember that, and it was pretty enjoyable. So let's try this part of most of Master Plan, which is a very short song.
Okay, sure. Extermination!
Okay, yeah, so you got those vocal hooks, right?
Yeah, definitely.
The gist of it is something like, you think your institutions are failing, but this is the way it was always meant to be, right? And it's kind of, that's a memorable idea. That's that's certainly the idea at the heart of any kind of radical politics.
Yeah.
Communicated simply and effectively, and kind of there's a stupid smart dynamic going on there, right?
Yeah.
It's like, just say it. So that's pretty good, and that sequence of riffs is pretty effective, right?
Yeah, especially, I really like that very, like, mid-era napalm death thing they do at the end. Just that, like, staggered fucking
that's
heavy
the most
thing.
unique thing. The beginning of it and the basic blueprint is very familiar. It's like, it sounds a lot like my favorite song off the first Bulba record, Never Kneel.
Yeah.
It starts with those big neurosis chords or whatever, but it really doesn't hit anywhere near as hard as a focused beatdown record like that.
Yeah, this is not attempting to compete head-to-head with conventional beatdown.
Yeah, so let me start complaining now.
Okay.
I think, or more. Like, I guess the vibe I have is there's this thing that they do, and maybe this will be in your last sample. Probably it will be, is my guess.
Yeah.
Is that they sort of... You can hear when they go through that initial kind of rapid chug and then settle into that dung da da dung da da dung da da dung.
Yeah.
Right? That kind of, it hovers around this trudge tempo. That's their default tempo, right? Yeah. And at it, that's a tempo that maybe was like that's a thing, right? This particular kind of trudging riff with these kinds of bending, hellhammery, frosty, wintry intervals over it. That was like developed maybe 10 years ago, right? It's pretty, by now, it used to be this like cutting edge, brutal kind of reptile brain thing. Now it's kind of part of a standard vocabulary.
Yeah.
And to use it, and it's still a totally viable technique. I think it works mostly in the transitions into it. And then for a bit, and as parts of a more dynamic song structure.
Yeah.
Where I feel like, and with, maybe you could make a whole album out of that, but you'd have to make it really riffy as fuck. I feel like you'd have to make those slow trudging riffs. Fluids was really good at that. Fluids this record is somewhat like the Fluids record, but Fluids I think just way better. The slow parts are heavier, the fast parts are heavier, the ideas are better, there's more thought, and the ideas are somewhat related to ideas on this record, but they're sort of more, there's more there. This is like, what I think is like, are you using the technology, or is the technology using you? Okay. And when somebody like Xibalba or those early HM2 bands are discovering that kind, or Nails, because Nails did it a lot, especially on You'll Never Be One of Us, when you discover that big kind of caveman walk riff, you're kind of in control, it's yours and you're in control of it, and you're expressing yourself through it. Whereas here, it's settled into a default. And I wonder if that's not, and it's not that heavy. It's kind of like, here we are, sitting around in the heavy riff. And you can see people sort of angrily walking back and forth in the pit, but it's not the way they did before with these other bands. And it's like, and what it reminds me of, linking back to your spicy take, is thrash, as pedal point thrash riffs as default in
I get what you're
metal,
saying.
Right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get what you're saying. I understand there's this, like, lingering quality to it, because I think that might be something that would be solved with just more fast parts on this record.
God, I mean, and a shorter record.
Oh, it's like 35 minutes. It's not a long record.
It feels so long. So long. It's like this vast, especially for anything with a hardcore influence, it's this to me it feels like this vast expanse of kind of trudging riffs and sort of riff events that almost rise to the level of really heavy or sort of like moshable or really moshable, and it's sort of faint in that direction, and then you just trudge through the stuff, and then you get to one of these kinds of memorable moments, but they're memorable more in a pop way than in a heavy music, than in an extreme music way. And so to me, it's I think there's potential here for sure, and like you were saying, that kind of early Napalm Death riff at the end.
Yeah.
Or middle era
Yeah.
Napalm Death, kind of leaning into the nu metal tendencies. Maybe that's something they can do more, and maybe the melodic kind of lead guitar stuff is something they can lean into more.
Well, let's get to my last sample, because that'll be another kind of like slow moshy part, but I think this one might work out a little bit better for you.
You'll get the last word on this.
Well, let's go towards the end of Orange Bottle Prison.
Dun 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 bam 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 bam.
Yeah, that could be a Hatebreed riff, and it could also be a Zabalba riff after it drops the tempo there.
It could also be, a lot of good things. It could be it's a close to a first album bolt thrower riff.
Mm-hmm.
There are some moments on here where they go towards the bolt thrower thing, and it's almost a cliche in this kind of hardcore at this point, and you can do it badly, but the bolt throwery stuff on this we all love bolt thrower. There's a reason people do that, right? So some of the more bolt throwery moments are some of my favorite ones on this record. Yeah, that's heavy as hell, that last riff. That's actually like something that would have been on You Are Not One of Us. And it's, I thought the build up to it was pretty heavy, but that had that kind of, the first break, they're using the nested breakdown technique, right?
Which I do love.
Oh, sure, we both love, yeah. Yeah, the moments where they're really stacking things up and piling them into each other, it's like, that's good, that's hardcore songwriting. I feel like the first one isn't that heavy at this point. If you've heard it, you've heard things like that are better.
Yeah.
If you'd heard it 10 years ago, you would have been like, whoa, that's a new kind of thing, I'm flattened, right? Here... But then it goes to that second breakdown, and the second breakdown with those kinds of wow, wow, that's also very Neurosis-y.
Yeah.
All the bands we like are in that last beatdown, right? And it's really sick. That's very heavy, and I respect that riff.
Okay. Well, I guess
it's got a lot of detail in it, right?
Yeah, no, I think it's a lot of fun, and I like how it kind of demonstrates this. There's detail to the songwriting, despite how kind of short and simple these tracks are. There's some like legitimate chops in terms of how they structure them.
There should be more detail in the details. Like, that's a detail. That's not a big hook moment in the same way. There need to be, in the bread and butter rhythm, quote-unquote, riffing, whether you're thinking of it as hardcore or metal or something else, that you need to just write good banging rhythm riffs that like throw into each other.
Okay, well that leads me into my last thing, I guess. That's actually was a good. So one of the things that I compare this to is a lot of this modern kind of, I guess, modern metalcore, if you want to see it in a very objective sense of metal plus hardcore.
I think the term is metallic hardcore.
Metallic hardcore. Oh,
I find that so annoying too.
That is very annoying.
People are starting to take the word back, like they did with goth, but I think they're doing it more strictly. They're doing it now with stuff that specifically sounds like late '90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, but let's listen to a newer band that's using a lot of these same kind of techniques, which is a band that I enjoy a lot, and I know you weren't like a huge fan of the first album, I don't think, which is Knocked Loose.
I just missed it. That came out in the 2 years where I was extremely depressed and listening to almost nothing but black metal.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, well, I didn't have any potential good vibes in my reservoir. Yeah.
So let's listen to some newer Knocked Loose, and this is a track.
Oh, yeah.
This is one of their big singles off the last album. It's called Mistakes Like Fractures, and let's just kind of listen to how they use these same ideas. Okay, sure. I'll throw in the next breakdown. But so you can kind of see where I'm coming from, like, of the techniques that they're using. Like this, I love the little, like, Slayer fills on that intro riff. You know, very.
I love they do the fast parts well. That's another crucial thing with this music. The fast parts, even if they're just in betweeners for the breakdowns, the fast parts have to be good. Those guys can play a thrash riff, right?
No, they definitely can.
Zabalba can play a thrash riff. Who else were we saying about this? Back in the day, I mean, this is old, but a good example of, like, not tossing off your thrash or old school death metal riffs is Converge. Converge wrote on Petitioning the Empty Sky, and Converge just wrote Slayer songs.
Yeah.
Like, things that were like Rain and Blood, but better. Like, literally just the middle of Rain and Blood, but better. And this band does that very well, and then the use of the deathcore elements is really sick.
Yeah, dude, that like old school deathcore breakdown is phenomenal.
The pinch harmonics are sick. Basically, to me, see, like, a band like Knocked Loose just absolutely wipes the floor with Terminal Nation. Just just crushes it. It's
okay.
And this was really good. I think I've seen a little bit of this video, but this is the first time I've really, like, listened to them. Yeah. So thank you for bringing this on the show. I'll have to just go,
Oh, yeah, definitely just listen to the band. They fucking rule.
Yeah.
Right.
It's really good. And I want to say also, like, I think what Terminal Nation needs to do is they've got this very sort of original territory they've created. Mm-hmm. But it's so eclectic. It's just this sprawling expanse of things, kind of where things don't happen and they kind of happen, and some of them are cool, some of them are less cool. I think there's nothing wrong with combining metal and hardcore. Indeed, that's at the root of literally everything we like.
Yeah.
Pretty much. But I think one needs to figure out to what end.
Okay.
And if they want to play up the mid-tempo thing, there are probably ways to do that. But I think, like, Knocked Loose, when you're going up against a band like Knocked Loose, as you said, the difference is that a band like that is working within hardcore structures. Mm-hmm. And Terminal Nation has this kind of, like, oh, we're not like the other hardcore bands kind of thing going on. And, like, well, if you're not, then you need to figure out what you're doing, because you're also not a death metal band, and you're also not a power violence band, and so then you've set yourself the tall task of making something original gel.
Yeah.
Right?
That's fair enough, and I think that's probably a good spot to end it on. Yeah. And we'll take a quick break, and then we'll get to our last couple demos of the evening. Mm-hmm. So next up, we've got Verhängnis with their, or his, I guess rather, self-titled release. This is I'm guessing this is just like a Bandcamp band that you found?
Just a fucking dude from Germany, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
It's a Bandcamp band. It's been around for 2 years. And I guess this is a good example of, like, how do you, like, find things? Well, you judge a book by its cover. So first of all, the logo immediately signaled to me. It's got a great logo and immediately signaled, okay, crust influence on this.
Yeah.
It's kind of, like, distorted and warped and organic, but not really in a gore way.
Yeah.
Second off, the cover is beautiful.
Yeah, I love the way the logo is, like, displaced in the water on the cover.
It's as a reflection in a water in a forest pool in this kind of abstract way. A quick thought about metal covers is one thing on the show that I think one of the underlying hypotheses of the show that we try not to talk about because it sounds pretentious. Maybe we'll talk about it more at some point. But like the idea is like, I think for a lot of my life I thought of metal as this kind of like thing that I really loved, but that like obvious and it was really important, but like wasn't totally serious art or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think we both think the honest opinion is probably extreme metal is one of the most. Probably maybe one of the most vital forms of music currently happening.
One of the last remaining ones, yeah.
Totally.
That, noise music, some hardcore...
Avant-garde techno, and some really weird hip-hop,
Yeah, exactly.
Academic music is totally fucking dead, and it's been dead basically, classical music died a horrible death in the 20th century. Jazz is, you can still find good jazz people, but it's like going to see old masters live.
Exactly.
For the most part. And the people who are doing new shit are engaging with this other stuff. Any halfway interesting music with capital A art music is drawing from metal, basically. And they say it, and it's in their press releases. I think taking metal really seriously as an art form, not in a pretentious way, but in the sense that it's like, it's quote-unquote low culture that does high culture better than high culture does. So much that high culture and the newspapers and the alternative culture people had to take notice eventually in the early 2000s. And the cover of this is just signals that it's like metal's cover art is catching up to the content. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
it's like, this is like a 20th century... I mean, obviously I love pictures of barbarians and hot chicks, right? But and castles. But this is like kind of earlier mid 20th century abstract painting applied to a metal context. And, call me simple or something, but I like this better than a lot of it. Right?
Hey, no, it's like as much as I love on my kind of music, pictures of dismembered anime girls, when they do something more abstract, it catches my attention. So that's totally reasonable to say. I mean, the whole presentation...
You can make a shitty, pretentious abstract cover, and we've all seen tons of them.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I like the idea of, reaching beyond your immediate ideas and trying to capture an essence. And,
exactly. It's being concrete by being abstract.
Yeah, it's like, because it's sort of like, one of those memes where it's like the progressing towards galaxy brain. It's like the lowest brain is like, fucking album covers and how they look are cool and important. And then the mid-brain is like, none of those matter, it's just about the music. And then the galaxy brain is album covers and how they look are cool and important again,
I agree. And also with certain kinds of stuff that's like... Yeah, we could talk about this more some other time, but with certain kinds of music where the differences between different projects are very slight, for better or worse, a different kind of cover can totally structure how you receive the music and allow you to notice other things in it. So actually, that's true of this, because this is extremely minimal, crushing death doom with an underlying chassis of crust punk. Yeah. Right? And if the cover on this had had a gory cemetery or whatever, or some typical shit, I might have passed it over. B, I might have heard different things in it, like, just kind of I might have heard the first track I find on this record, kind of the least interesting one. It's just this kind of ponderous, winding, old-school death metal that, other bands have done in more engaging ways. But you're already thinking of it in this kind of Moulderyawn way from the cover, this kind of weird, strange, dark forest way. So why don't we get to one of your samples, which has the more sort of the off-center side of this.
Okay, cool. So let's try out my first sample, which is called a track called Odem. Let's just talk about that, and there's some interesting influences on this record, so let's try it.
So yeah, what did you hear in that? Because to a untrained ear, because I'm not like a, right, I don't know my OSDM that well, so to me that actually sounds like one of the more typical parts on the album, although it's good. Right?
It is typical in a sense, but I guess what's interesting to me is how it reflects kind of this primordial era where doom death and crust and a lot of these kind of adjacent ideas were all congealing in their separate genres. Because on one hand...
Congealing into, right? They're they hadn't yet.
Congealing into, but also, like, disparately. A lot of people were arriving at the same kind of ideas at the same time.
And from different places, right?
Exactly. Because, for instance, this could be, especially that opening riff, that could be off Winter. You know, that's a very Winter-type riff. But then... certain parts of certain melodic ideas could also be off the very first My Dying Bride record, As the Flower Withers, which is a much more ugly death metal influenced record.
Is that like the dum 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 dum?
Yeah, that could be My Dying Bride, but
that
also
was a really big hook there.
Also, it's interesting because that same riff at the end there that you were into could also be off early Carcass or Impetigo, like early kind of gore grind stuff that still had that still had a lot of this like doom death DNA in it, you know. And I feel like one of the big threads that goes through all of those is Autopsy, who really did craft.
I thought you were going to say autism.
Well, autism also, but Autopsy kind of constructed a lot of these paradigms of doom death.
Thrash metal has autism. Sorry,
but yeah, a lot of
sorry, my friend's just been sending me a ton of that meme.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But I think Autopsy has a lot to do and really constructed kind of like this technique of how to write these sorts of doom death riffs, and I hear that a lot through this record.
Yeah, that was really good, and I think you hear a lot of the basic elements of the formula here. One thing we've talked about before is sort of, I guess this is one of my pet theories, the sort of, and I think a lot of people would agree to it, but the sort of alternate history of a certain kind of like cross-genre entity that you could call like the legacy of UK stenchcore, like slow crust. Just the idea that you get, on the one hand, you get bands that are purely that, like Deviated Instinct coming out of Amoebics, but you also get somehow Napalm Death. You also get, at the same time, somehow Godflesh right after from the same people. You also get Bolt Thrower, right, who in some sense are just the full development of the stenchcore idea. And nobody can do that shit now without incorporating it.
Yeah.
And you also get the Peaceville bands, right? Especially like Gothic by Paradise Lost. When I listened to that really for the first time a few months ago, and I was like, "This is sick," right? And that even preserves the kind of Gothic or medievalist things you get in Amoebics, right?
Yeah.
So this record is very rooted in that crust legacy, and not in a sort of superficial or it's not signaling it too hard.
Yeah.
And it's not being like, this is crusty death metal. We're going to throw in a lot of D beats and stereotypical crust stuff. It's not a marketing gimmick.
Yeah.
You can just tell the guy I think maybe has German dreadlocks too. It's hard to tell, but it's definitely looking that way. So so this is old, deep, naturey, crusty stuff.
Yeah.
So let's go to I picked samples that highlight that aspect of it more. So let's go to Altwasser. This is, at the beginning of this track, this is the second track, and at the beginning of it is when my ears began to perk up after listening to the first track. They did some bolt throwery stuff there, but everyone does bolt throwery stuff now, so you can't totally judge on that, right? Here's where it comes to fruition towards the end of the track.
Yeah, so that's really interesting because it's interesting, like, what you can pull from these ideas, because that strikes me in a way as being like that big tremolo riff. It could be incantation, and in a sense, it could also be Beharit in kind of an elaborated way. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What I really like under it is a thing that people often miss about Crust, and that Crust bands often miss about Crust, is the extremely fluid, almost jump to fuck up sense of time under a lot of the best early stuff. Kind of extremely groovy and funky in a perverse kind of perverse non-funk way, right? This isn't funky; it's very rolling and oceanic, but it's got that rhythmic play and openness to it. Yeah. And what I love is that this is drums forward doom death, like. What's carrying the trem riff is good, and the riffs on this album, aside from the first track, are I think really good in terms of that kind of thing I was talking about with the Terminal Nation, bread and butter core rhythm riff writing. Yeah. How do you make just a crushing, solid rhythm guitar riff in whatever your style is?
Yeah. And I guess this is where I'll get a little more critical. Is just from. Am I good?
No, yeah, I'll talk about the drums in a sec.
I don't feel like this is a super strong record from riff to riff. I think that all the riffs on this record are functional, but I don't think that's where the real intrigue of this music lies.
Yeah, so I mean, I sort of get that. I think what I like about it is, we've talked about it in the show, how I like kind of deliberately quote-unquote boring music.
Yeah.
This is very focused on, there will be micro variations in the riffs, or on certain formulas, or little parts that you'll find more interesting. But yeah, no, the riffs are not the star of the show for the most part. I agree with you.
Yeah.
It's just well done, and under that, what's driving that part of the drums.
Yeah.
And it's this continually rolling thing of toms, where it's like, rolling toms is a common idea, but he's taken that to just such an extreme. Like, the whole last part of the track is double bass, and at the beginning it's got this, he's using this kind of floor tom thing. It's rippling, and it's very sort of continuous. I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, on to your next sample.
Okay, so...
Which shows more of the fancy stuff.
Yeah,
and... The stuff that boosts it for you.
Yeah, and I think the fancy stuff is where the real interest in this music lies, because I think if you strip out some of the fancy stuff, you've got something that's probably like I would pass over just because it's very conventional, it's very straightforward, it's not super detailed for the most part.
Strip out the fancy stuff and the drumming.
Yeah. So let's listen to this passage off Necrot, which I think is probably like the highlight of the record for me.
God, that's heavy.
Yeah, and just the way that choral synth part comes in is probably the coolest and most interesting part of the record for me. I love the fact that it's this very like consonant choral melody grinding against this more dissonant riff under it. It's really fascinating on a record that mostly operates in these kind of conventional spaces. It's wild. You know?
And it's because he set up this very stable background of just solid rhythm riffing, you know, but nothing that's you're gonna write home about on itself.
Yeah.
Making these little variations, kind of like with the Crushing the Scepter earlier, right? And in its own way with the Terminal Nation, right? There are these small variations that matter a lot. And here it's Well, that idea, right? The interlacing consonant and dissonant stuff at the same time, right? And giving you the payoff of both. That's classic black metal, right?
Yeah.
Especially second wave and the stuff that's remained most faithful to that in different ways. And that reminds me of a little bit of the way that the Peaceville bands are kind of like the UK's version of early black metal.
Yeah.
It's, that sort of... Because it really, I mean, I get how, but that's completely specifically death doom and like gothic death doom, but it also gives me the black metal feels. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And a cool thing also is that when I initially heard that, I thought the riff under it was more just kind of grinding power chords, the dissonant one. But if you listen, it's actually got these like, horrible tritone leaps on a lead, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like an incantation riff, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of like subtle incantation, not the very obvious way that incantation clone bands do these days, but it appreciates it.
This guy doesn't have a set idea of how this music is, quote, supposed to sound.
Yeah.
This is another good example of being original by being in the origin.
Mm-hmm.
He understands all these different currents that were feeding into this sound, so he's not recreating early death doom, iterating on somebody else's blueprint. He's almost creating simultaneously with the people who are making it in the first place.
Yeah.
It's how you make new stuff. I'll just roll us out with a banging crust riff that to me is just like, does the stuff that I want to hear on a Terminal Nation type record or on a beatdown record. It's just another good example of this sort of UK stench legacy stuff, and listen to this funky sort of funky breakdown shit. And if we have time, I might see if I can play us a sample after it. But let's go. This is on Sapro-Biont, which is again tree core.
All right, let's try that out.
Yeah. You can do the nu metal bassist dance to that breakdown, right?
Oh yeah, that is a surprisingly straightforward breakdown at the end.
You could hammer fist to that, right? Mm-hmm. That is really cool, extremely dynamic. He brings it in a surprising way. I gave you so much of that 6/8 lead-up riff, so you could hear the breakdown hits. There's this riff at the beginning that doesn't repeat exactly. It sets up this looping cycle, and then the breakdown hits one rep earlier than you think it would.
Yeah.
And then it goes out into this, just extremely groovy, and then it links out into this very satisfying, just sort of bolt thrower riff stripped down to like 3 notes, and it has that kind of like Hellenic black metal kind of triumph feel to it, you know? It just, that sequence to me is just like, that might be my favorite moment on the album.
So overall, I like it a lot. I take some slight issues with it just because some of it is kind of stock, and I didn't mention it before, but real quick, I'm not a huge fan of the production. It's clear enough, but it has this very kind of remote, distant feel, and I feel like a lot more power would be brought to this music if it was brought up front. But overall, I do like this a lot, and I'm kind of excited to see where he goes from here, because he's just released this and one other demo this year. These are his first releases, so I want to see this idea iterated on, hopefully with more of the kind of like fancy, weird elements that we've been talking about.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I'd be really excited to hear like an EP or a full length from this guy.
And I think if he wants, clearly he wants this sort of atmospheric sound with these shades of melody or whatever, and this kind of organic, dark nature thing. Well, you can still do that with a more in-your-face sound, right?
Yeah, you can.
It's a matter of trying to capture space and depth while being a little more gut punch, right?
Yeah.
Because the music gut punches, in places like what I just played, gut punches really hard.
We can just amp that up with a little bit more like forwardness in the production.
Verhängnis, cool band. If you want a pretty tape, get it from fucking Kill Records or Kellerassel.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll go on one last quick break, and then we'll be back with our final record of the night. All right, so let's get to our first ever submission to the show with Oppress, with his first album, No Pity.
First off, great band name. Very second wave Norwegian. Very much in the tradition of, you need a devil, I'll be your devil.
I'm amazed that it hasn't been taken.
Very, very Emperor, right? Just naming your band Emperor, right? It's which I think is the ultimate band name of the first bands. Cool band name, extremely aggressive coming on. Can they back it up? Or he back it up?
And for the most part, he does. Yeah, I was surprised that our first ever submission was something that was actually a very cool record,
Yeah, that's very encouraging, honestly.
It means the right people are listening,
For sure, yeah. So what do we want to lead with? Let's do sample first on this. Do we want to lead with... I almost thought like the very beginning of this record would be good, just a good start,
I mean, that works for me.
Yeah, this record comes in hot, as it were. So this is from Onto Silling, Silling. I have no idea what that is.
All right. Well, let's try that out and just give people a vibe for what this sounds like.
Word. Yeah, man, so what do you make of that?
So this is very interesting music, like the kind of influences that he's selecting on
that
this.
That howl at the beginning is deranged.
Oh,
right?
Yeah. No,
and then you think that's the crazy part, and then when the vocals come in, you're like, oh god, this is the crazy part too.
The vocal performance on this record is something really outstanding. It's got this just this really unhinged quality, and it's very dynamic. It's clearly pulling a little bit from like Attila from Mayhem.
but it's not slavishly imitating things Attila did.
Yeah, no, it's not a replication of his tone, but more in that theatrical style where he's kind of customizing the style to what he wants to convey.
Yes.
It's not blocks of lyrics, you know?
No, it's being actually inspired by it as opposed to imitating it. I think the only other vocalist I can think off the top of my head who does that convincingly when he wants to is Pest from Gorgoroth.
Yeah.
Or from Under the Sign, who's just one of the best black metal vocalists. But he mostly just shrieks. This is, so the Attila thing is great. You thought a lot about Mayhem when you heard this, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of Mayhem on this, but I cite it as very influenced by, Grand Declaration of War more than De Mysteries. There's this whole idea of, like, these intensely wide dissonant intervals across this record, which reminds me a lot of Grand Declaration, which I would say is a record that is heavily inspired by the Thorns record, which we should talk about at some point because it's just this forgotten thing that I think is super influential in modern black metal.
People talked about Thorns more back in the day, right? That used to be one of those deep cut references that everyone knew. Like, oh yeah, Thorns, man, and now you don't hear that as much.
No, that Thorns record is immense and amazing and bizarre, and everyone should listen to it.
That went out the door with the end of Trenchcoat black metal.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's, this is which is ironic because once Cool Guy Black Metal came in, Thorns had already done it all. But this is, I hear I guess just because I haven't listened to Grand Declaration of War, I also.
Oh my God, you
DMDS,
haven't?
Don't think so.
Oh Jesus, that'll be an episode sometime.
All right, I guess I did. You know, I assumed that Mayhem would no longer be interesting to me after DMDS, and I know I was wrong.
It's like
Chimera is good. Chimera is good.
The Grand Declaration is like almost an equal to De Mysteries, which is a very like spicy take.
And I heard Wolf's Lair Abyss is just kind of like unhinged DMDS, so I probably like that too.
Yeah.
You know. But basically, I hear the fluidity of DMDS in this, and I imagine that sticks around in later Mayhem in one way or another.
Oh, definitely.
But there's this really fluid feeling to the motion in the riffs and between them. Liquid kind of clattering sound in the drums that's like what Hellhammer did. And let's go to your sample, which has some more of that, what you identify with Declaration era Mayhem. So real quick, before we get there, I also want to say, about that specific sample, I thought it was going to be bigger on this record than it ends up being, but I think as a structural principle, hardcore, just really up there. And what he leads with a lot of on that beginning are these kind of, the rhythms are way more open than on, quote, normal black metal, which maybe Mayhem does on Grand Declaration, but I'm also hearing almost noise rocky post-hardcore stuff.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
Kind of syncopated, pulsed, you know, syncopated pulsed riffs, and he's just extended them a lot longer than like Unsane would do it or something, right? Yeah, so it's got this it's internalized that, and it has this kind of wicked black punk feel that is often, a lot of people do it really, really badly, and it's really cringe, but a band that does it really well is Urzite. I don't like the scene of bands that's associated with. I'm not sure I even like Urzite's general vibe, but the music is excellent, and this at times kind of reminds me of Urzite, which is just this deranged, stomping, Hellhammer Mayhem stuff.
Or even like
vocals.
Contrasting to that, I would say a lot of this resembles the best parts of like Ashpool, if you remember that.
I kind of remember the vibe. Yes, it is like, sadistic, crazy black punk at its best. Yeah.
So let's listen to my sample. This is going to be off the final track of the album called Persecution Erotica, and I think you wanted to remind them to listen to the lyrics.
Listen to the lyrics, which are very audible.
Yeah. All right. Let's try that out.
Follow
what is that lyric? It's something like, say something from behind, fucks you as he snaps your spine.
something to that effect, which is just great. And it's
that's
kinda...
really deranged, and that's completely running against, I mean, just in terms of black metal actually being confrontational and, at times just grotesque and whatever. There it is, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's actually kind of this whole niche, and it was bigger back in, like, the late 2000s, early 2010s of, like, kind of sadomasochistic black metal.
Which I think can sometimes be a cop-out, because it's like, oh, it's just all sex and kink and play, but not for this band.
No, I would even say that, honestly, a lot from that scene was, like...
Oh, we're talking about different scenes. There's punk scene stuff that does that, like, our way of being edgy is being really into bondage.
Yeah, no, I'm talking...
oh, okay, bro. There actually were really funny punk memes about that back in the day.
No, there was there was an old band called Octagon that was really into like BDSM black metal, and there's been aspects of that on plenty of better known bands.
Satagua, who we're going to talk about in a week or two, who we both love.
Satagua is amazing, or like Carpathian Forest. Obviously, there was a lot of that. What I really
this
like...
is far beyond BDSM, right? This is just Jack the Ripper shit, right? And tons of bands have Jack the Ripper-y lyrics, whether they're death or black metal bands, right? Everyone has like, chainsaw splattering nuns, like whatever, right?
But like Mayhem, yeah.
Yeah. However, this is sort of somebody thought about these lyrics.
Oh yeah, and
it's like it's much scarier. Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is just like on a lot of the lyrics on this record, it is very BDSM because it's about the pleasure you're taking from this like horrible mutilation, but it doesn't feel like gore grind lyrics. It's more about like the weird like emotional mental state, which is very cool. So what I think is so interesting about this sample is what I pull from this is obviously, like I was saying, Declaration era mayhem, but also a lot of kind of orthodox black metal ideas, but stripped way down. Like a lot of orthodox bands, if you're listening to DSO or you're listening to Onscopt, who I do actually like a lot, they kind of
around on that. Yeah.
Onscopt, I saw them live.
I feel like I liked Orthodox stuff back in the day, but it was more like trying to like it. And in the end, the things that really stuck for me was just Azoth and DSO in a different way.
But, Onscopt, I saw them live.
Well, I hated DSO back in the day, but my friend sold me on it.
Yeah, seeing Onscopt live completely converted me. I was like, holy shit, these guys are amazing. But
cool.
But I feel like, so you listen to a band like DSO or Onscopt, they're kind of like attacking you with this barrage of dissonant riffs.
Yeah.
This is kind of a similar idea, but it's like, let's take all the excess notes out of it. Let's strip this down to this very minimal kind of like Beharit or Havohe style kind of attack of these massive intervals between these notes.
But they're very clearly defined and beautiful melodies.
I don't know if I would say beautiful.
Chase each other. Listen to the way they chase each other. Like they're like, that's like something that shouldn't. That's like water flowing upward.
Yeah, and another big thing that I would point out, because I mentioned this on like a previous episode.
I think it's a sense of melody that's different from Orthodox stuff. But I'll get into that.
Yeah, I guess I can see what you're saying.
I get what you mean. The technique is coming from Orthodox. I hear that. The structure is, and some parts are just really skronky, but in a more articulated way.
And
but I guess what I mean is they're writing melodies. They're just not consonant melodies.
Yeah, well, I think the skronkiness comes through from another band that, like I was saying, I've mentioned on the show before, which is Furze, which is an outstanding band that has been completely forgotten by the greater black metal circle,
again,
so to speak.
Gone with the trench coat.
Yeah, it was very progressive, but very trench coaty. It was like, imagine a band basically playing proto-orthodox shit alongside, Waters of Weeping or something.
Yeah. What's Waters of Weeping? I don't even know what that is. So.
Waters of Weeping, goddamn, what band was that? Oh, Vedwin's End. Yeah.
Oh yeah, see, I can't deal with that album, man. Oh god.
We had this exact conversation on our previous
Written in
episode.
Waters.
I really like that. Oh, not Waters of Weeping. Yeah, excuse me. Waters of Weeping, that's a Black Funeral record. Yeah, Written in Waters. You're right.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess for me, I'll try to clarify what I mean by that. So yeah, there's this Orthodox thing going on. There's also, I think, on a lot of this record, there's a very sort of... There's a lot of influences going into this. This person listens to a lot of shit and has an idea, a very clearly defined idea of where they want to go in this first record. And there's also just a lot of just sort of sinister British music in this. I believe these guys are Brits, right? English?
Yeah, he's from Norfolk.
Yeah. So it's got... It's got a lot of Killing Joke in it, right?
Yeah.
And for a lot of bands, the Killing Joke influence is filtered through third or fourth hand, through DSO or your various Orthodox bands or any band that has a post-hardcore influence, right?
Yeah.
But here it's really close to the source, and it sounds kind of like, the absolute weirdest stuff. And there are some parts of it where it's a weakness. I would say, if there's one weakness on this record, is that, say, like on the back end of On to Ceiling, they get a little too into the sort of Killing Joke. They get a little too into the sort of sitting on a dissonant arpeggio kind of thing for a long time. Yeah. Which a lot of the Orthodox, that's the major crime of a lot of Orthodox bands. Like K.V.N.T will be like, back when they were somewhat good, right? They'll be like, here is the sick riff, inspiring, and then it'll be like, and that will be the...
I would argue that K.V.N.T was never good, but...
I Am the Earth is a good song. That's just the only song I remember by them, but it's sick. But yeah, this band is getting that a lot more honestly and has a more interesting guitar tone. It really sounds like Revelations era Killing Joke. That's what I was looking for. But still, just hanging out on things like that, we've all heard it before. That's the most sadistic thing I'll say. Like, cut the fat. Like, you don't... This is fast, dynamic music. You don't need so-called atmospheric parts in that way.
Yeah.
And it's intensely atmospheric in the riffs themselves.
Yeah, no, you could probably strip this music down a little bit and it would have even more power. You know?
That's probably true. You could make it... cut some of the fat in the arrangements. I think some of the weird interludes are really cool. There's one called Live Stream Suicide.
Which is great.
That's just a root note chug for 14 seconds that cuts off in the middle of it.
Yeah, which is awesome. I love that.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So let me go to my sample, and then I'll say a couple really... I'll say a couple of kind of over-the-top things, tying this into some stuff, and we'll go. But this is from La Petite Mort. This, to me, is the most beautiful guitar work on the album.
Okay, let's try that out.
Yeah. All right, so the reason I chose that, and we'll talk about it in a sec, is that just gorgeous riff lead at the beginning. But in the middle of it, there was this series of transitions, which were all kind of cool, but maybe could have been trimmed a bit. But then I was like, why did I leave this sample longer? And then we got to that riff at the end. And
oh, yeah. Where I said, this is the coolest riff that Deathspell Omega never wrote.
Oh my god, the rumbling bass during that, right? That's some good hardcore stuff. That's also some good, like, Paracletus being a lot like Screamo or whatever.
I mean, it's...
The rumbling bass chasing... All these instruments are chasing each other in a really cool way.
Yeah, I mean, I would say this is, in terms of kind of like top-down for this band, I feel like, to get a little more critical, the flaws of this record are pretty standard for the style of, like, one-man auteur black metal, which is a lot of the songwriting, not really in the passages we've chosen, but some of, like, the middle of the album, the songwriting can be a little bit blocky, and the production is dry, and certain parts of this are lacking a little bit of detail that I would have appreciated. I think this is a band where... What? Go ahead.
What do you mean by blocky in this context? Because they're really good. You know, they're like... This guy is, if anything, extremely good at transitioning between riffs.
He's good at...
flow between each other.
He's good at transitioning between riffs, but I also feel like... Well, I mean, this is kind of a discussion.
I think there are too many... I think on the part we just played, one could say in the middle, there are too many transitions for his own good.
I actually don't mind that at all. I kind of like the weird, oblique nature of that. I guess...
I liked that part too. I'm just trying to, I think you could cut it if you wanted.
I guess what I'm saying is... So I feel like the big thing is this is one of the few cases where I think a one-man project...
You know what I mean? He could be relying too much on his skill at writing transitions to string it together.
Well, I think this is a very guitar-reliant album in general. And I think this is a case where it's a one-man project that I think would be better served by becoming a full band. I think that if we could add more detail in the drums and just kind of like get a little bit more like live heat to this music, I think it's solid as it is. We both like this record a lot, really, and I will probably listen to this in the future, which again is rare on the show, but I think that there's a potential here that could be unlocked by getting more people in just to add those kind of like fine details that are made in the rehearsal room. You know what I mean?
It's very dynamic music, right? There's a lot of this accelerate, slow down. There's pretty, the guitar playing has some, force in it. It's physical guitar playing in a lot of places. So I think this would, having your own band, difficult. But it would really benefit from that. Given that he's got friends in K.V.N.T Kolektiv and maybe the guys in Viola par la Signa or whatever.
Yeah.
All those dudes maybe get a band together, a lineup for this to do the recordings, not just live, because I agree that it would thrive on that. And there is one cool thing about it is as fancy and high concept as it is, there's this just total punk underbelly to it.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
And you need a band for that would be really good, and you can bounce off each other and mess up a little bit.
Yeah, and I think
some
that would,
mistakes on this would be good.
I think that would benefit this music because clearly he's a very talented guitarist.
Make it, you know what it is? Yeah, this already has this. This is a great example of doing high culture by doing low culture. Wearing your high culture lightly, which I'll get into in a sec. Internalizing it all into this sort of just gutter filth music, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, without losing any of the stuff that's important about it. So, make it even nastier.
Yeah, and I guess just as a quick parting note, I'd like to say, OG, I know you were asking for our cruelest comments, but I guess that's about it. You actually did a good fucking record, man. This is solid shit.
Let me just rant about that one riff at the beginning of the sample first.
Sure.
I can't even hum it right now because it's so precise that it's hard to remember. What that is a fully realized melody. And it immediately, and it's got that awesome thing where it starts in one channel and then the other channel comes in, and even though they're doubling each other, it's got, again, that liquid chasing, pursuit effect. And what it immediately, if you want to reference it in metal, Akerkaka comes to mind as a big thing for this band. This, I think, and Miasma and the Carousel of Crippled Horses, who are a band I liked a lot back in the day and have been meaning to go back to. I don't know. Have you heard of them?
I'm not familiar at all. I'm interested, though.
Very strange kind of, I think they were into, like, Goblin and things like that, which I've never been that interested in, but it's a bunch of, that's the sort of basic format, and there's a ton of other stuff flowing into it. It's basically this kind of alternate universe, what if cyberpunk were actually cool Victoriana occult stuff? Not cyberpunk, sorry, steampunk. Occult Victoriana stuff. And this band, to me, places itself in a kind, is drawing on ideas from a very specific time period. This is sort of, how do you do UKBM that's rooted, which is a question we've talked about a lot on this show, the UKBM problem, right? Well, what if it's Victorian rooted? Well, or late 19th century. Akerkaka does that well. Miasma brings it forward in this kind of turn of the century. You know, the pretentious word for it is fin de siècle, people say that, or whatever, or like decadent art. And what it reminds me of, and I thought of this, the covers, what put me onto this. Because the album cover, which is really cool, is like somebody's fucked up, gnarly...
Oh, dude, the album cover of this is so fucking sick. If you're listening to this, you need to look it up just for that.
Yeah, we won't even describe it, I think, but it's like a fucked up version of like an Aubrey Beardsley, I think, engraving or illustration or something. I think that's the...
I also got a big vibe from an art book that I have, a guy called Takato Yamamoto, who does this sort of like Japanese woodcut, but like fucked up with BDSM and just like bizarre
interestingly,
stuff.
People like Beardsley would have been really into Japanese woodcut. That was filtering into English like decadent or aesthetic culture in the late 19th century. And that sense of clear line and sort of like deliberate two dimensions. That's totally
very flat color.
Yeah, Beardsley would be drawing on that to some degree.
That's cool.
I think. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, these things all link up. I'm pretty sure this is deliberately a thing going on in this band. And again, it's being worn very lightly, but it's there, so it's important to talk about. And so the Beardsley thing cued me into this sort of turn of the century Victorian sort of spilling into modernism moment of art. And what I thought about was, where's that melody coming from? Things like that. And throughout this kind of like, at best, disharmonic, at worst, very skronky sounding, but these sort of haunting, strange melodies that aren't like conventional BM melodies. Stuff like Debussy and Satie, right? Have you heard that stuff? It's, these are both composers who get cliched a little bit, and... in some sense, they're a little, Stravinsky is maybe more punch in the gut, more metal, but they've got this eerie, it's some of the first atmospheric music, basically, and it's got this eerie sense of melody in it that...
No, I'm not familiar... I might have heard Beardsley like back in the day, but one that you have listed is Schoenberg, who I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah, so the early Schoenberg stuff, think of like the Sprechtzing stuff, like not the 12-tone shit, which is I hate.
I love the 12-tone shit, but
that's because you like anti-music. I mean, that destroyed that basically destroyed music for the rest of the 20th century. I mean, like our academic music.
True.
It's it was this turn towards total. Or it captured the avant-garde for the Academy. But it was... but early Schoenberg, I agree, it's really, really cool. So the crazy Sprecht stuff where the German person is doing this patter and sort of speaking and yelling, which is kind of already like goth or hardcore vocals, right?
And a lot of it's very like an antecedent of modern like dark ambient in a way.
Yeah, for sure. And so, you get that in these other guys, too. And there's also this network of, like, literary references. It's like English people absorbing really perverse, decadent French culture.
Yeah.
Obviously, none of them or even the Frenchmen pushed it as far as this band. But you get these guys like, so Beardsley or, like, the poet Swinburne, who's really cool and pretty metal in a weird way. Intensely repetitive and physical kind of flowing stuff. Very sadomasochistic. And what he's really into is stuff like Baudelaire or the Marquis de Sade. And the craziest of them I know, I haven't even read this guy, but I just heard of, Lautréamont, who's this far-out, late 19th, early 20th century French guy from this tradition who, wrote these crazy songs about, like, who wrote these crazy stories about things like, I turned into a shark and swam through a swamp and I ate and fucked the other sharks.
That sounds sick. I need to read that.
Yeah, you'd really like it. That's about as far as this area of as far towards sort of metal and noise as this.
Well, yeah,
era
because
went.
I love de Sade, and I love like the 120 Days of Sodom, so that sounds right up my alley.
Yeah, so it's basically hard actually to get. The Englishmen were always more English than that, but it's basically hard to get more metal than Lautréamont. So this has all kind of that vibe, but it's not being like, hey guys, check out my literary reference points, check out my whatever. It's just there.
It's stuff to dig out,
In the same way that, in the early Scandi BM, it sounded like Grieg or Wagner or any of the cliche things to reference, or there was this kind of Nietzsche, Viking, swirling nexus of angry Teutonic stuff, right?
Yeah.
But it wasn't, it was also just really dumb, aggressive, insane music with people. Yeah, so I think this is great, basically, and if our if our show is helping promote this kind of music, fucking fantastic. So we'd like to hear more from you, and also my last recommendation: make it cheaper on Bandcamp. I understand £6 for a tape. I don't have the money for a tape right now, but they're lovely. But if you made the digital album, pay what you want, or £2 or even £3, one could buy it more affordably, and you could spread your music, and I could buy it, and anybody who might be following me could buy it. If you have £5 to spend on a digital thing, get it right now. If you want $6 and you want to pay for shipping, get the tape, I'd say.
Yeah, definitely.
But cheaper, I think when you're starting out and you're trying to promote your music, you got to make it. You just got to go the route of making it cheap at the beginning.
Just accept the fact that you're never going to make money off this shit, like us.
We want to make money off it. It's
yeah, true. I probably shouldn't say that.
I think the point is it's fine to make money off it, but at the beginning, the best way to ultimately making at least some money off it is to make it free at the beginning.
That is true. All right, so that's probably a good place to end off of. So before we exit out with a final track...
speaking of money,
So before we exit out, what are you listening to this on? Are you listening to it off Podcast Addict or iTunes? Or are you listening to it on YouTube, sitting in your apartment sad and alone? We don't care where you're listening to it, but... leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe, do any of the equivalents of those things on whatever platform you're listening to it on, because every little bit you do helps us grow, and if you leave a comment, we'll probably shout you out on the podcast, because we're very sad and lonely, and not a lot of people talk about us, so... But thank you guys for listening, hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time.
And for a rollout track... why don't we try... I've only listened to this album just all at once, so I don't even know what's the best track. But as far as things that the Verhängnis reminds me of, and as far as just totally crazy music, how about we go for a really underrated band, Prophecy of Doom. You heard of these guys?
I have not, but that sounds very cool.
Acknowledge the Confusion Master. They're sort of... they're just mega heavy grinding stenchcore. From the early 90s that had these crazy, sort of awesome, sort of conspiracy theory lyrics, and really moshy parts. And I bet they're like the last people on Earth who will sue us, would be my guess. So let's just play it, all right?
Let's
go for Insanity Reigns Supreme. Sounds like a good track. Let's go.
All right. Thanks a lot for listening, guys, and we will see you next week.
All right, roll.